Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Diana often thought that her future was predetermined in advance. Some people are given everything by fate, although they don't seem to do anything special for it. Others struggle like a fish against the ice all their lives and are small. Hard-won successes are replaced by a series of failures, disappointments, and sometimes even real disasters. Diana's family lived in the village. Her mother, a young graduate of the village school, was abused by drunken scumbags on the night of her graduation. Her former classmates. Anna was the prettiest girl in school. She had a lush blue dress made for the party. By morning, it was just rags. Anna wanted to kill herself. The first person to see her was Principal William. He stayed at the school until the last minute. A gala dinner was served for the boys in their own dining room. Then, of course, there was dancing. At the end of the day, everyone went out to see the sunrise. It was only then that William parted from the graduates. It was like a sign. They were adults and didn't need a review. And the principal went through the empty school, turned out the lights and went home. He lived quite far from the school on the other side of the village. He had a car, but he didn't use it much, unless he needed to go to town. But the bicycle became a faithful friend. William was still young. He just turned 30. And now he was pedaling, enjoying the morning coolness, admiring the early dawn. He was not far from his home when he heard a soft crying, a thin voice. It was a child or a girl crying. William jumped off his bike, realizing at once that there was trouble. The sobs were too bitter for him to hear. Yet he had not expected this. Anna was sitting on the grass with her arms around her knees in her dress. Her face in dirt and bloody streaks her nose was smashed. Anna was shaking. And never before had William heard such a desperate, hopeless executioner. The principal sat down next to the graduate. No one ever found out what they whispered about that bright hour. It was only morning when the three scumbags met in the latrine. Lived on the edge of the village, an alcoholic LX. He was about 50 years old, and he was attracted to the paratroopers in the village because, drunk, he told everyone that he had once served in the paratroopers, and he was almost sent to Vietnam, where he would undoubtedly show everyone. And saying goodbye, Alex would raise his palm to his temple and say, "I have the honor." So Alex lived on the outskirts in a hut, collapsed and in a cesspool. Up to his neck in frequencies sat sobered up. The guys on the edge of the pit were Alex and William. Alex had a shotgun because, among other things, he was also an avid hunter. And every once in a while he would point the barrels at one of the guys and command, duck and shoot, and really fire his 2 barrels just over their heads. And to stay alive you had to dive in the dumpster hole. By the time the trio had lost the appearance of humanity, William told them to pack up the house and the rest of the village for good. Kindly, the police should have been called to start an investigation. There were examinations and a trial and a deadline. But Anna begged not to make the case public. She prayed to God that no one would know what had happened to her, to avoid the shame. So 2 men went on a lynching spree. Rapists. After that, indeed, no one was ever seen in the village again. But somehow the village found out what had happened. Alex swore it wasn't him talking. He wouldn't even tell anyone drunk. Most likely, the guys shared it with their relatives before leaving. On the one hand, their loved ones should have been grateful that the punishment was limited to just a shameful bathing out of purity, and that the punishment was fair. Neither could anyone deny it. Anna had always been characterized by modesty. No one would dare say that she herself was to blame for what had happened. On the other hand, the boys' parents had definitely lost their sons forever. They couldn't go back. William warned that in this case, prison would be inevitable. But even though the scumbags got their payback, Anna still didn't want to live. Her faith in people in her future was all trampled. And then the villagers had to aghast a second time. William married his former student. It all happened kind of fast. He proposed, she accepted. Instead of a wedding, they just signed at the registry office. No sit down, no guests. And it happened that Anna got pregnant almost immediately and gave birth to a daughter prematurely. Diana took after her father. It was visible to the naked eye. Strangers noticed how much she resembled William, but the villagers believed that the girl was the daughter of one of the boys who had abused her mother. They even wondered if she was from Nick, Frank, or Andrew. Anna asked her husband to do an examination, but he refused flatly. "I don't want to go along with silly rumors to prove anything to them," he said. "Besides, even if I reproduce the certificate that I am Diana's father in 100 copies and hang it on the wall in every house, people will keep saying what they want. They like it that way. I don't mind, I'll get over it." William did everything he could for his young wife. Under his supervision, Anna graduated from the pedagogical college by correspondence, began to work at school as an elementary school teacher, and they had a nice house and both loved to work in the garden. And on a long teacher's vacation, they went to the sea with their little daughter. And no one said anything to their eyes, neither they nor William. In front of them, everyone pretended that they had long forgotten the story. But when Diana grew up, she realized that everyone remembered what had happened to her mother. A girlfriend told her. It was a great shock for Diana, but the sensitive girl understood her mother better not to question her, not to cause her additional pain. Diana noticed, and that her parents forbid their children to be friends with her. She's on the street bad heredity. The principal is raising someone else's child. The girl will grow up to be just like her real father, drinking, whoring. She heard it behind her back, and though William was fond of his daughter, it could not overshadow the alienation of those around him. By the time Diana graduated from high school, her family had 2 more sons growing up. No one had any doubts about them. And Diana realized now that she was back on her feet, she had to leave. Her mother is behind her father like a stone wall, and she herself has no place in this village, where every family's lineage is known to the 10th knee. Here you can't get married, marry, or live anything. And after the graduation party, Diana packed up and left for the city. Her parents found it natural. It is necessary to study further. But the girl hid her plans from them. Institute is, of course, great, but she wanted to get on her feet as soon as possible. And she went to study at hairdressing courses. And at the same time got a job in the park to ride children on horses, to take care of the horses, to put the kids on them, to lead under the reins around the circle. Having grown up in the village, the girl knew how to use horses. She was not afraid of them, and she was taken to this place without a second thought. The pay was not much, but her parents sent her enough money to rent a room and live very frugally. In her dreams, she had already planned her life. She would graduate from the course and get a job in some salon. Surely there the earnings will be higher. First of all, Diana will get her hand in, as they say. Secondly, if she saved every penny, she would be able to buy everything she needed to open her own hairdressing salon. Then Diana planned to go to the district center, where it would be possible to rent premises inexpensively. There's a shortage of barbers in the neighborhood. There will always be work, and my parents are close by. You can visit them whenever you miss them. She hadn't thought about marriage yet. It seemed to her that everything is still ahead of her, and you need to first get on your feet. The girls she knew were having affairs, living with one boy and another. But they rarely invited her to the wedding, unless one of her friends realized she was pregnant, and then the young couple would apply. The rest wanted to have time to travel the world, build a career, fall in love more than once, and just to not bury themselves in a maelstrom of domestic responsibilities. But as they say, a man assumes and God disposes. In the park on the same platform with Diana began to work Thomas. And the girl herself did not notice how between them first friendship, and then a closer relationship. Apparently, Diana lacked warmth, having left her family in a foreign city so early. She felt lonely. Things were different with Thomas. The young man had his own apartment, even if it was just a 1-bedroom and not in a prestigious neighborhood. But it was still a home, and Thomas was happy to share it with Diana. He also suggested the girl to sign. Now the two of them would come to the park in the early morning to work on the horses. Thomas was a veterinary paramedic, and Diana learned a lot from him. The summer flashed by unnoticed. At the end of August, the young people were married. Diana thought about inviting her parents to the wedding, even if it was a modest one. But Thomas talked her out of it. They decided to set the table at home, invite their closest friends, so that they would not be in a hurry, so that no one would make remarks to them. However, it could not be avoided. Thomas's friends were smoking and talking loudly in the stairwell at midnight, so the neighbor flew out for a scandal. But in general, the evening was successful, and most importantly, they managed to save a lot of money. Thomas persuaded Diana to quit her job and finish her studies in peace. It'll be fall soon anyway. There'll be a lot less visitors to the park. He'll be fine on his own. Diana hesitated. Earning money would give her some autonomy. She would be completely dependent on her husband, but fate had decided for her. Diana realized she was pregnant. She knew from her friends that in many cases you can work until the maternity leave. But this was not her option. First of all, she could not get any maternity pay at such a job. Secondly, the smell of the stables made her nauseous, dizzy, and her eyes dark. Diana was admitted to the hospital for a short period of time and was discharged with a recommendation to treat herself as a fragile crystal vase. To rest more. No heavy loads, walks in the fresh air, vegetables and fruit in the diet. As fall came, Thomas also began to bring in less money than in the summer. He started looking for part-time work, traveling to calls, treating animals at home. If the cases were uncomplicated, and with Diana he began to quarrel. Returning, Thomas himself stopped by the store for groceries. He liked to save money and was a virtuoso at it. Diana knew that such a husband would not leave you hungry. He made soup out of an axe. She used to like it, but now she often realized that she could not bring herself to eat this or that dish. Pea soup and sugar cubes disgusted her. Thomas, on the other hand, was angry that his wife had turned into a snowflake and could not be pleased. Once Diana asked for chocolate ice cream. That day she was feeling particularly unwell, lying on the sofa, trying to move as little as possible. She wanted to eat, but she could feel it. The only thing her body could take was popsicles. Thomas, on the other hand, had brought her the cheapest ice cream. Diana cried out in frustration, and her husband was furious with her. "I'm sick of you." He threw the plate with the ice cream at his wife. "You lie around like a cow all day doing nothing, and everyone owes you everything." Known to be resentful and unstable at times by women who are expecting a child, Diana was sobbing and couldn't stop. The hour was late, and the room was alone. Thomas had nowhere to go, and he could not hear the crying any longer. He rushed to Diana, began to beat her head against the table, repeating, "Shut up, shut up, shut up." From pain and fear, she could only cry softly. That time she forgave her husband. But Thomas apparently realized that it was okay to raise a hand on his wife. And the next time she aroused his irritation, he simply pushed Diana away. So she flew across the room and banged her thigh painfully against the corner of the table. A huge bruise blossomed on her leg. "What are you doing?" Diana asked bitterly. "You can't hit me now." "Oh, come on." Thomas sounded contemptuous. "Who's hitting you? You can see anyone." When was the next time he raised his hand to her? Diana ineptly tried to fight back, and such fights, ending in violence, began to happen between them more and more often. Diana tried to go to her friends, complained to them. They consoled her, advised her to leave Thomas without looking back. "Where would I go?" Diana asked. "I don't have a place to live. To go back to my parents without a husband, pregnant. Can't you imagine what kind of life awaits me there? Everyone will point fingers." This is the 21st century in the city, and such cases are normal. And there I'll just lock myself up and stay at home. There was no friend who could take Diana in. One has her own family. The second lives with her parents. The third rents an apartment. I'll be patient. What to do? Diana sighed. Maybe when the baby is born, everything will change. But Diana's baby was not destined to be born. The pregnancy was terminated prematurely. It wasn't Thomas' fault directly. Diana was home alone when she felt sick. Then the emergency room and the loss of the baby. The doctors consoled her. "You are still so young. Take 18 years off. Rest for a year. Then get pregnant and everything will be fine." Thomas didn't come to pick up his wife from the hospital. He was working that day. When he came home, Diana realized that he had no compassion for her. He didn't see anything special in what had happened. Perhaps he thought it was for the best. And we don't need a child now, he concluded. The apartment is small, there's not a penny. When you get a specialty, go to work. Then we'll see. In the shower. Diana hoped that her husband had learned a lesson from what had happened. He couldn't have been unimpressed by it all. And if he raised his hand against her next time, it could end even more tragically. But as it turned out, the husband hadn't come to any conclusions. And if Diana annoyed him in any way, his fists itched. And this was a time when a young woman needed to come to her senses in every sense. The medics would speculate about hormones, the psychiatrist would hint at depression. And the first big fight had tragic consequences. It was Friday night. Thomas in his dreams imagined a set table, some appetizers, and most importantly, plenty of beer. And after that, having come to a relaxed state, it would be possible to watch a good fight check, and then fall asleep to it. He had told his wife in the morning that he would organize a feast in the evening. The weather was very bad, dreary rain and cold, cold and rain. We should do something to make ourselves happy. But when he got home, the refrigerator was empty, as they say in a popular TV show. There was no mayonnaise and no iron bars. Why haven't you gone to the store yet? Did you go to the wife? Diana tried to explain. Not to the store. I paid the rent. And then I had a really bad headache today. I went to the pharmacy and got some medicine. The pennies don't work for me. I took the cheapest one that was effective, but there was still no money left. There's a packet of pasta. I didn't boil it for you. It's 15 minutes, and then it's hot for you. Got any melted cheese? It'll be macaroni and cheese, like in Italy. Like in Italy, you say. Thomas started freaking out. What did I tell you? I'm supposed to eat this stupid food now. And take your pills for dessert. The idea of taking money from whoever you want and whatever you want. It's not my fault you make so little money. Trying to snap at Diana, so pick up your part of the couch and go to work. Finally broke Thomas. You're a nobody you know. And you're not a good hostess. You can't take care of yourself, and you couldn't even be a mother. Diana burst into tears, and Thomas grabbed her by the hair so that he almost scalped her. Stop whining. I can't take your whining all day. What the hell do I need you for? Diana ran out into the entryway and sat in a corner under the stairs until late at night. It was dark and cold, but no one could see her, and she could cry until she got out. It was a good thing the door to the house was left unlocked. The young woman made her way in when Thomas was already asleep. But that dark and bitter evening, something irrevocably changed in Diana. The next day, she went to her parents' house. They greeted her affectionately, but she noticed that the family had already adjusted to life without her. The younger brothers were studying with their mother, and their father had his own affairs and worries. They told Diana about them, but they were their own affairs and they did not concern her. What they did know about the daughter, however, was that she had married and moved in with her husband. She did not go into details of the case. So as not to upset the closest people and everything that concerned her health, she hid too. She saw that her father and mother were doing well. Her mother said that Diana's brother had already started seeing a girl and would bring her home. A new family will be formed, and there would be grandchildren. Diana nodded. She understood that she should be happy, but her heart was bitter, as if she was all alone in the world. This time, she especially tenderly said goodbye to her loved ones, hugged everyone, told them that she loved them. And she added to herself that she was sorry if she was guilty. When she got home, she waited until Thomas left for work. She gathered up all the pills. What were in the house, poured them in handfuls, drank them, washed them down with milk from a bottle. Diana deliberately left the door open so no one would have to break it down. That's what saved her. 2 women knocked. They needed to read the meter. The door was ajar. The women entered, distracting the owners, and saw Diana lying on the floor. An ambulance took the young woman to the hospital. But for several more days, doctors could not guarantee a favorable outcome. The risk was too great that Diana, even if she survived, would never fully recover. This time Thomas was really scared. Maybe not so much for his wife as for himself. If he was to be blamed for her death, he called Diana's parents. And the first thing the young woman saw when she came to her senses was her father and mother crying. The father looked very old, and the mother felt immensely guilty. Anna did not leave her daughter's side for the first time, because Diana felt very bad. She had hallucinations. As soon as she took her head off the pillow, she began to feel dizzy. So much so that the young woman would have fits of sickness. You, Diana, have forgotten many words. You could hardly remember them. Sometimes you substituted words that didn't make sense at all, and many everyday skills were erased from her memory. Her mother had to teach her how to eat with a spoon, how to dress herself. Trying to give her daughter back some mental strength, Mother talked about the path she had traveled herself. I didn't want to live either, she said, after what those scumbags did to me. And if it hadn't been for your father, who knows if I would be alive now or if I would have killed myself. Mom, can you tell me the truth? Not to other people, not to Dad, just to me. I need to know. Dad, he really is my father. Tell me the truth. I didn't doubt it for a second. Anna answered firmly. I would not be afraid to go to any examination. Look in the mirror. Your eyes are the same. And the pride is not the same, and he can't stand to be pitied. You used to clash, little one. I reached out to pet you, to soothe you, to blow on your sore spot. And you fell down quickly. You go under the table somewhere. Don't touch me was the only way they'd calm down. If they leave you alone, your father's the same way. And William asked his daughter, tell me what happened. Was it Thomas's fault? Is it because of him that you took this step? Just a hint, and I'll deal with him. You'll put him back in the latrine. Diana sighed tiredly. No, I just need to pull myself together and take charge of my own life. Maybe you'll come home, her father asked hopefully. Diana had never been able to admit that her parents' home had never become her home. Maybe if, when the tragedy happened to her mother, her father had not decided to stay in the same village against all odds, but had taken the young mother to a place where no one knew them, things would have gone differently. But Mama had grown accustomed to the rumors and gossip. Or maybe they had died down over time. Either way, she was content with her fate. Diana, however, realized that she had to start all over again. Fortunately, the head doctor called somewhere, and Diana was taken to the psychoneurological dispensary for another month after discharge. She liked it there. At the hospital, the nurses rate her out as if she was the only one to blame for everything. But here, with souls as grief-stricken as Diana, it was impossible. Diana came in here early in the morning. It was cold outside and right off the corner. But here it was warm and quiet, as if in a kindergarten. The patients were given breakfast, which always included a sweet treat, chocolate-covered cookies. You could pour yourself some hot water and make tea. Then the women gathered in the recreation room. There were lots of live plants here. There were palm trees and rollers. The windowsill was littered with flowers. Green branches tied along the walls and behind graceful Poe. Here even equipped a mini corner. The blue crystal of the aquarium glowed mysteriously. The canaries were counting and pouring arrows. All this relaxed and soothed the nurse invited patients for injections. After receiving their share of antidepressants, some women were going home, with their husband and children waiting for them. Others went to their rooms to rest. Diana almost always exercised this right and stayed at the dispensary until the nursing staff had gone home. The head doctor talked to her and found that Diana had completely good prospects to recover. How is your course of study going? He asked. I've abandoned everything, she said with a guilty smile. You understand marriage failed pregnancy, then all that. The doctor looked at her without judgment, but with sympathy. Yes, there are circumstances in life that force us to abandon our plans. But in your case, it's a temporary measure. You realize you're young and you need to get a profession. Your depression is too closely related to your low grades. You subconsciously realize that you deserve better treatment from your husband for a better life than the one you are living now. But at the same time, your mind says no specialty, no income. So you have to accept what you have now. And this contradiction drives you into a maelstrom of longing and hopelessness. I understand, Diana said quietly. Yes, you're right. I'll try to finish my studies and recover. But good. Now the doctor was smiling. In 3 weeks, your treatment with us will be over. Try to keep it together. If you feel that you are experiencing the same condition as before, you should definitely contact a specialist. We will help you, but don't experiment with medications anymore. You've already been miraculously pulled from the dead. Tell me, do you regret what you did? I do, Diana answered to say something. In fact, in her heart she wasn't sure at all. She had to start from scratch again, and she had so little strength. If things ended the way she planned, she wouldn't have to worry about anything else. I'm writing you some more medications. The doctor has sketched out a prescription, but take them carefully because the effect is cumulative. Diana came home, calmly cooked a light supper, and went to bed early. Thomas behaved decently, didn't try to shout at her, didn't let his hands loose. Or maybe she herself was seeing through the smoke. After all, she'd been sedated so much. Diana left the dispensary with great regret. Now, she had lost the quiet haven in which she had been accustomed to spend the whole day. She decided to call her parents tomorrow and ask them to lend her some money. She would finish the course, start working, and pay them back. Diana was sure that Thomas would not give her any money for her studies. The longer they lived together, the more greedy he became. In his mind, Diana should be busy with housework, should show miracles of economy and not demand too much. Maybe he subconsciously realized that if she found a good place, she would earn more than him. She would run away from the kind of life he had set her up with. Diana decided to call home in the evening so her parents would be home, but she didn't have time. William reached his daughter on his own. "Mom is dead," he said. Diana slowly sank down on the bed. She realized that her father was broken. Usually, no matter what was happening in the family, he kept the opposite. With all his appearance, tried to show that nothing terrible had happened, reassured those around him. And if he had any self-control at all, he would never have told her the news without preparation. But I guess he didn't have any mental strength left. What happened? That's all she asked. Diabetes, father sobbed. Diana had never seen him cry. Mom had diabetes. Shocked? She asked. Imagine that. She hid it from everyone. Only the paramedic at the hospital knew and my mom. And then she went to her neighbor. She was seeing her son off to the army. I don't know what she ate or drank. I was sent to a teacher's conference. I wasn't home for a few days. My mom must have run out of medicine, and she was stupid enough not to call an ambulance. The guys got home late. They thought she was asleep. But in the morning, they looked over and the father was crying. "I'll come," Diana said. "Nothing's running late today. Tomorrow morning. Come, the funeral's the day after tomorrow. I know the women are already here. They'll do everything. You have nothing to worry about, but just be good to me, and stay with your mom. I know she loved you more than any of the kids." "Can't be shocked," said Diana. "I mean, she must have heard from all sides that I wasn't your daughter. But Anna and I knew the truth. On the contrary, she thought she had ruined your life. Couldn't keep you from gossiping that you might be afraid of her. Didn't want to live in the same house. That's why she let you go to town. But she had a hard time with that. And I'll be there." Diana kept crying on the first flight out tomorrow. "Daddy, you hang in there." Her native village, though it had a bus connection with the city, but only 3 times a day there was a shuttle bus, and it was packed to the gills. But Diana had no luck at all. The day after the brief thaw, there was a terrible ice storm, and the flights were canceled altogether. "Young lady, how am I going to get there now?" Diana asked the cashier at the bus station. The question was purely rhetorical. It was clear that the cashier could not help her. "I have a funeral to go to," Diana added. In her heart of hearts, she didn't hope for anything. The cashier shrugged. "Call a cab. Maybe someone would be willing to drive." "I don't think so. I can imagine how many accidents there will be today and how many people won't be able to get to work. It's the first time I've ever seen ice like this." Diana thought it must be even worse in their village. Here at least the janitors sprinkle sand on the roads, but in their village streets and alleys it must be a pure skating rink. It was possible to call a cab on the mobile app. But Diana decided to walk down the street to the small square. There was also the bus terminus. That's where the cab drivers always hung out. She didn't have enough money. If she took a private driver, she didn't know. Maybe in this weather he'd charge double. What do we do then? Diana's only valuables are a gold wedding ring and a cell phone. To get to her parents' house, she was willing to give up both. Immersed in her thoughts, Diana lost for a moment the caution, the concentration, the strength that is necessary when walking on a slippery path. She fell instinctively, putting out her arms for support, and cried out in pain, hitting herself very hard. Not immediately was she able to move her arm. In classic stories, the girl is sure to turn her foot. Immediately a knight is announced, who in his arms carries her to the bus stop, to the house, to the doctor. Substitute the right option for the prophet. It doesn't say anything. But Diana's arm was just as bad, and she tried to keep it weighted and not move it. God forbid another fall on that same right one. Where the cab drivers were always shy. This time there were only 2 cars when Diana reached them, and named the village she needed to get to urgently. One driver refused flatly. "What's wrong with you, girl? I don't even know how to drive people around town, and you're going all the way out here." The roads there are like glass now. The second cab driver quoted a price that was exactly the amount of money Diana had in her purse for the return trip, which she would have to borrow from her father. But Diana was still tearfully happy, if one can be happy when rushing to her mother's funeral. "Please," she begged. "Let's try to drive." The boy signaled to get into the car. Diana grasped the handle with her right hand out of habit and cried out in pain. "What's wrong?" "I fell unluckily." She grimaced, trying to hide the pain. Diana somehow got comfortable on the seat. When the cab driver turned around and asked, "Did you break your arm?" "No, I guess not," she replied. "I wouldn't have been able to move my fingers then." "That's not necessary. Give me the right one." Diana held out her hand, and he quickly, skillfully felt it, almost without pain. "Let's go to the trauma center for an X-ray," he said firmly. "No," Diana almost shrieked. She didn't have the money to make another detour to the hospital. Yes, there would probably be a line there. One thing she needed right now was to get to her mom and dad. "You're not a doctor," she said. "How do you know?" "Actually, I work in the Ministry of Emergency Situations," the cab driver admitted. "I know how to give first aid too. And I don't like your hand." Diana was so exhausted, so overexcited that she told this stranger everything. And that she was in a hurry to go to her mother's funeral, and that the most important thing for her now was to get there. And there's nothing to do in the village. They'll have to help her with some other bandages, and they'll do some light work. She was so worried that she didn't notice where they were going. And then she realized it when she saw the car pulling into the town. "I don't have any extra money, I told you." There was desperation in her voice. "I'm asking you for money." The cab driver didn't even turn around. "Do you have your passport?" "Of course I do." Or they might ask her if she had a passport. He drove her not to the traumatology department, but to the largest surgical building, where he said he had his own people. And indeed, he soon came back for her and led her through the corridors to the X-ray room, where an older lab technician quickly took pictures. She also asked Diana for her passport and policy. The latter, of course, she didn't have on her. A companion. Diana took the still wet scans and quickly walked down the corridor. Came back in about 10 minutes. 3 doctors told me that there is a fracture, he reported. "They're going to put a cast on you now. No need." "I know where I'm going. There's so much to do. There's a canvas. No bandage. I don't mind. Andrew will do it now." Half an hour later, the car was once more carefully making its way through the merging streets. And Diana's companion, whose name was Nick, said, "Just be careful with that arm. At least for a month until the bones start to stick together. Thank you. They'd made a subtle switch to you. And for asking for the painkiller shot for me. Thank you. Something cold to put on at night. Pain and poetry." The car was warm, and Diana didn't notice herself dozing off. It was as if she had been released for a short time. The anguish and mental and physical pain were gone, and Diana slept so soundly and so vividly as she had when she was a child. She awoke when Nick gently rubbed her shoulder. The car was parked at the entrance to her village. Where to next? Oops, Diana perked up. Stroked her hair to the end of the street. "I'll show you the rest." She saw from afar that the gate of her house was open. People were coming out. Until then, she hadn't fully believed her mom was gone. But now she understood everything her father had said. Did she? There was the coffin lid standing sent against the wall. Diana cried. "Thank you so much." She unzipped her purse, took out her wallet, and shoveled all the money out of it. "Fuck you," Nick said. "I mean, that's not what I meant to say, you hang in there. I'm gonna give you my cell phone now, so you can tell me when to pick you up." "Thank you." Diana got out of the car carefully and staggered toward the house. She had never cried as much as she had in those moments when she had clung to her father. And he cried with her, too. He had never thought that Anna, whom he had treated all his life not only as his wife, but also as his child, would be the first to leave. And he, the old man, would be left to live. Diana only hastily hugged her brothers, noting with an edge of consciousness how they had grown up. The house was bustling. There were no ritual agencies here, and as in earlier years, they were preparing to see the deceased out of the house. And the tables for the wake were set in the school canteen. The whole village wanted to say goodbye to their teacher. There just wasn't enough room at home. William and Diana stayed up at night, sitting in the big room. Anna's face was as calm as a sleeper's, and it was as if she was present for the third time. "She knew your life was hard," William said, "that you were keeping her safe, not telling everything. But she felt everything and took it very personally. Daddy, you don't mean to say that she got worse, that her illness worsened because of me?" "Not my daughter. She was just hiding it from all of us. I guess it's a family thing, sharing the good things. And the bad things you have to go through alone. It's not right. Maybe someone close to her would have helped." "Yeah, well, that's the way it is now. The action's over." Diana's arm ached terribly, but she was crying because of another pain. "Will you come back to us?" William asked. "I don't know," faintly answered Diana. "Mama would love to have you back in the house. David is getting married too." David, as tired as Diana was, she still couldn't help but wonder about the eldest of the brothers. She still considered the child. But what can you take from that brat? Who was Nancy on, remember? Here too, Diana was at a loss for words. Nancy's mother was the most scandalous woman in the village, and she had many children. How many nerves did she get on the nerves of teachers who were supposedly prejudiced against her children? And Nancy, the troublemaker who no one of her peers wanted to be friends with. Anything out of line, she threatened to complain to her mother. And then Helen came to school and organized another showdown, bringing to tears both children and even teachers. One of the young teachers, who had the honor of teaching Nancy, quit when she couldn't take it anymore. Helen called her every night and pissed her off. It's a good thing it was only figurative. She could have meant it literally. "He's out of his mind." Diana asked, referring to her brother. "I'm telling you, he's a knob, and Nancy's pregnant. That was a judgment. Try not to get married around here. The eldest daughter's gonna take off and dance on the ashes." They'd been saying for years she was out of her mind. Mom knew about it. Of course she did, William sighed. She said, "Let the young ones live with us. We don't have to go to that close-knit woman's house, only before dawn, when there was no more strength to speak or cry." Diana quietly fell asleep on the sofa. Left for a couple of hours, managed to feed. It gave her the strength to get through the next day. At the funeral and wake, almost all the women cried. Anna was loved here, but Diana remembered what someone had said. Poor thing. So from the very beginning her life had not worked out, that her youth had been broken by those scoundrels, that God had given her a short life, and that she had no grandchildren. Diana realized that people have not forgotten anything, and the story of her mother will be passed on from generation to generation, and they will talk about her themselves. And this very Dinka was born from whom of that trio, who knows who, that they mocked her. Diana went to her native house, not knowing how long she would stay there. But the very next day after the funeral, she noticed that Nancy had practically moved in with them. Where would she live now? One room was occupied by the young people, and the second room was occupied by Ben's father and younger brother. Diana was left with the largest passageway room where she would always be in plain sight. Nancy did not hide her pregnancy. Every now and then she emphasized that this she could eat, and that she had no money anymore. It seemed that wherever she went, everywhere she went, she bumped into Nancy. "Are you staying until 9 days?" Nancy asked Diana. "Maybe longer. You're married, aren't you? Or are you just living with someone?" Diana was used to such impudent questions. She didn't feel well. Her arm was always in sharp pain. She was sleepy and had no appetite. To top it all off, after watching Nancy and comparing some facts, Diana bought a test at the optical kiosk that had recently opened in the village. She realized that she was expecting a baby too. Everyone in the house was already asleep, but she sat on the sofa and did not move, staring at one point as if thinking about something. And then she erased Nick's number from her phone. Who was he? A casual acquaintance. Thank him so much for all the good he'd done her. But she can't owe him too much. Diana owed him nothing. When 9 days had passed, at dinner, trying not to wrinkle her nose at the smell of herring, Diana said, "Tomorrow I am leaving." She heard Nancy sigh with relief. Her father was genuinely saddened. "But why don't you want to stay?" Diana had to remind herself to pull herself together. "I have my own family, Dad," she said softly. "I can't leave it." Thomas is waiting, worried. In her heart, though, she trembled. They, knowing that they will meet her at home. Her husband will do nothing to please her again. I guess that's what we should do, contact his parents. Maybe they'll do something to appease their son, or maybe she can stay with them until the baby's born. She had an address for her father-in-law and mother-in-law somewhere. She remembered that they were very sorry that Diana had lost the baby. Let them help keep it, and maybe even raise it. At dawn, when Diana was getting ready, trying not to wake anyone, the first bus was leaving at 600 am. Her father came out into the kitchen and handed her a bank card. "What is this?" asked Diana with surprise. "Did your mother save it for you? It's kind of like her inheritance. No one but me and her knew about the money. You see how it's all working out. Young people are gonna take over the house now. I know you won't take a penny from this place. Well, at least don't give it up. Take the single and it'll be easier for your mom where she is now." Did it take much for Diana to cry like a little girl again? "Come on, I'll walk you out." Her father picked up her bag. God knows when we'll see each other again, and if we'll see each other at all. When Diana returned to her husband, it was noticeable that the tragic event in the family had taken its toll on her. She became very silent and quiet on her mother's dime. She finished a hairdressing course and put the rest of the money into an account. If before, when her husband attacked her, she tried to defend herself, to fight back, now she avoided all confrontations. She did not talk to Thomas herself, but only answered his questions and tried to gain experience. She wrote an ad that a novice master goes to pensioners at home, cuts and does styling for free. She began to have her own clientele. At home, Diana moved like a shadow. Sometimes Thomas forgot she was even there. He would see his wife sitting at home in a corner sewing something. But the young woman couldn't help thinking about what would happen when the baby was born. She remembered how noisy and quiet her younger brothers had been as babies. Would Thomas freak out if the baby wouldn't let him sleep on the rest of the money she'd had? It would be possible to rent an apartment and live. But Diana had a reason for not touching that amount. As the doctor had said, her pregnancy was going smoothly, and Thomas was behaving more or less tolerably well. Except sometimes he'd push her aside if she was in the way, or slap her on the back, as if in jest. Diana had mentioned this to one of her clients, an old woman from the 3rd floor. Aunt Anna and unexpectedly heard from her a woman who lets her hand be raised. She had to be beaten 3 times a day in the morning, at lunch, and in the evening to make her realize that such an attitude could not be tolerated. When her due date approached, Diana asked the doctor to put her in the hospital in advance. He agreed. It was just a vacation, spending time with the girls in the room, listening to their stories, napping when she wanted to, and eating. 3 times a day, 3 days after Diana was admitted to the hospital, son Mike was born. And if before Thomas did not visit his wife discourages with the fact that he has no time, their doctors, they will do everything that is necessary. But now, after the birth of the heir, he began to come and even brought money. He bought expensive ham juices at the store. At his stinginess, it was a clear indication of good treatment. Now nights, Diana pondered what made her husband the way he was. Maybe his parents had saved every dollar, and often she thought of Nick, someone she never thought could be cruel. Lucky for the girl who would be his wife. When Diana was discharged, she saw that her husband had prepared nothing for the baby. Before the birth, she had not agreed with him on the subject, fearing another scandal. But now she dared to ask the question a crib stroller. She listed the essentials, fearing that any increase in costs would cause an explosion of anger. But Thomas behaved in an unexpectedly peaceful manner. He slapped his palm on his forehead. Ew, it slipped my mind. Let's go buy it. What about it? Who are we going to leave him for? Diana nodded at Mike, whom she had put on the sofa. You're right. All right, write me a list of things to take. The rest of the day passed quietly. Thomas brought both the crib and the bathtub. About the stroller, he said that a friend had promised to give him an almost new one. The baby had grown up in their family. Diana cooked dinner, and she even had a thought that it might be possible to rebuild the family. One brick at a time. Such peaceful evenings would make a life. But at night, Mike began to cry and could not calm down. Diana carried him in her arms. She was still very weak. She was desperate for sleep after the birth. But she could see that her husband was not happy. Demonstrably turning over from side to side, trying to cover his pillow and his head. Listen, go out with him. Finally, Thomas couldn't take it anymore. Diana looked around confused. Go where? In a one-room apartment, even if they hide in the bathroom or the kitchen, the baby's cries would be audible. Go to the stairwell. It's cold there. Diana couldn't take it. And the neighbors will start asking what's wrong. Do you care if the neighbors get a good night's sleep? Or I have to work tomorrow, by the way. His yelling is giving me a headache. I'll be on my feet all day tomorrow, too. Diana tried to talk some sense into her husband. It's a time like this, you have to be patient for a few weeks. Then the little one will sleep better. For a few weeks, Thomas pulled his eyes out. And how do you envision it? I'll be like a zombie coming to work. You're at home. You're home. You can go to bed when you want. I doubt I'll be able to lie down tomorrow and sit with the baby all day. That's work too. Oh, don't give me a responsibility to people. Don't compare. Mike, sensing the tension in the air, shouted especially loudly, and Thomas had gotten up to shut him up, or did I shut him up myself? Diana was all too aware of what might come next. She instantly snuggled the child into the blanket and sprinted out onto the stairs, forgetting to dress herself. The young woman was well aware that the baby's crying would wake the tenants, so she went downstairs and walked in the yard for about an hour. Before the baby fell asleep, I froze myself, but going up to the apartment was scarier. Only in the middle of the night did she carefully put Mike in his crib. Thomas had long since fallen asleep. Diana lay down on the edge of the sofa, but she could not sleep. What to do with despair? It would only get worse, she thought. A couple of days later, her father-in-law and mother-in-law came to see her grandson. They were simple village people. Diana felt that they treated her well, and they liked the baby very much. Lucy, Aunt Lucy sighed, swaying. Mike sighed pitifully. We'll go away and not see him grow up. How about we stay with you for a while, Diana pleaded. The son is too young. He keeps Thomas awake. He's angry. How angry the mother-in-law looked at Thomas, perplexed that the baby was crying. It's a common thing. He'll stop crying. He cries half the night. Thomas said glumly, I'm already walking around like a zombie. Ed, Aunt Lucy's voice had an unaccustomed reproachfulness. From spoiling you, wife, is money hard with you, not the other way around. Try to please someone like that. Come with us, my daughter. True, we don't have special conditions. But we raised our own and will raise yours somehow. Uncle Stephen nodded in agreement. When the parents began to pack for the road, Diana quickly packed her few things. Don't take it from here, Uncle Stephen advised a lot. I'll give the bear a lead. He did not fail. The old people's cottage was small, but Diana was warmly welcomed. They gave her the bigger, brighter room with the windows facing the street. The same day, Diana was suspended in the corner. There was nothing left to do but lull her son to sleep. Did the fresh country air have an effect, or the fact that the mother had stopped being nervous? But the baby began to cry much less. However, Diana's life was not easy. She grew up in a house where there were conveniences, but here there was no need to think about it. She had to heat the stove and run to the small wooden box to go to the bathroom. The bathhouse was heated once a week, and if it was necessary to wash during a break, a basin and cats would help. Firewood was also saved, and in the morning it was not just fresh in the hut, but even cold. Diana used to take Mike to bed with her. She was afraid that he would not freeze. Thomas, who had rarely come to see his old people before. Now that his wife and son were living here, he didn't show up more often. Taking a vacation from us, Diana joked, but there was bitterness in her tone. But she didn't want to go back to her husband either. Month after month went by, and she still lived in that little house. The news from her family was not good. Dad had a stroke. The loss of his wife was not in vain. The doctors were reassuring with good care. William would live and maybe even recover. But would he have that good care? David married Nancy, she gave birth to a daughter, and they all lived in their parents' house. Not only that, but Nancy's mother had moved in, the scandalous Helen, allegedly to look after the sick. But Diana highly doubted that was the case. It was just that the house was just like Aunt Lucy's, and the woman wanted to move to better conditions and to feel like a hostess. Diana's younger brother could not stand such a neighborhood and left school and entered an agricultural college with a dormitory. Diana realized that she could not live in the same house with Nancy and her mother. By nature, she was not capable of scandals. But these two women would make her a paradise. They don't care why Diana and Thomas live apart. Rumors will spread throughout the village that poor Anna's daughter has gone down a bad path and given birth to a child. God knows who, the apple of the tree, and so on and so forth. Sometimes it's the smallest thing that can bring you out of your daze. One morning, Diana was cleaning the house, lost the mirror, and suddenly looked at herself with strange eyes. Painfully thin, cheeks sunken, hair hanging in icicles, a dirty stain on her cheek. The day before, the electricity had been cut off. It happened a lot in the village, and I had to cook not on the electric stove, but in the oven. And my head hasn't been fussy for a week. Old things are a pitiful sight. If I live like this, soon I'll get to the point where I'll start giving change near the church. Diana thought with despair, but soon anger joined the despair. She had to do something to fight. She called a girl she had been friends with before. "Helen, help me out. Can you find me a cheaper place to rent?" And yes, Mike might need a babysitter for a few hours a day. To her surprise, her friend was able to arrange both. The very next day, she reported that her neighbor a floor below worked up north and would be happy to have the apartment forewarned and pay the utilities. About the babysitter, Helen was also reassuring. She has a Betty acquaintance who will not refuse to help. The girl is very shallow after school, could not get anywhere. I mean, she started and dropped out. She's just looking for such a job as a nanny and takes cheap. But dead or gone. Thought Diana, it is scary to start in an unknown voyage, but only in the swamp to drown even scarier. She said goodbye to her mother-in-law and mother-in-law very warmly. They had sheltered her in such a difficult time. They had shared everything they had for her and her grandson. Thanks to this respite, Diana came to her senses, and now she has the strength to move on. She owes them a great debt of gratitude and will try to repay them one day. Diana felt an unusual sense of lightness. As she closed the door of the city apartment behind her, it was up to her now, and it was much easier to rely on someone who was not trustworthy to Thomas. She didn't announce her arrival. The next day, she called the city's hairdressing salons and wrote down a few addresses. She was invited for an interview. Diana was afraid she wouldn't be taken anywhere, but she was wrong. She was offered two options, one closer to home, but one with a higher salary. After talking to Betty and making sure she could trust her, Diana chose the higher wage. It wasn't easy, but it was nothing compared to her previous situation. Diana tried to be as responsible as possible at work, and the landlady was pleased with her. Diana went home from work to take over Betty's duties, but the girl often stayed over late. They would have dinner together and talk about life. So Diana had a new friend. Betty really wasn't distant. But as far as housework was concerned, she had all the arguments, and Diana was glad. Back in the warm, cozy house, Betty was not lazy to clean up and cook. Mike sleeps late. She waved her off when Diana began to thank her. What else am I supposed to do? Not read books. The landlady had a good library, but Betty couldn't think of reading without horror. She would turn on the TV, find a show, and start vacuuming. Diana tried to compensate for her hard work, her assistant with money, and both were satisfied. William was slowly recovering from his stroke, getting back on his feet. Helen, who was not friendly to everyone and scandalous, became attached to him and took care of him, albeit roughly, but diligently. When Diana called her brother, he reported that her father was doing well. Diana did not think about such a thing as a private life. Enough. She had more than enough of her marriage. Thomas learned from her parents that Diana and her son had moved to the city. But the old people couldn't say where. Diana hadn't left them an address. She assumed that the house was someone else's, and she had no right to invite anyone here. But Thomas didn't make much of an effort to find them. It was as if he thought they would have to show up themselves. Diana, for her part, decided that if her husband asked for a divorce, she would give it to him the second he asked. Let another woman suffer with it if she wanted to in a year. Diana had so much experience in the hairdresser's shop, such ability and tact with her customers, that the landlady did not hesitate to entrust her with the most capricious and wealthy clients. And all went away satisfied. And then the young woman withdrew the rest of the money from the book, added to them those that she had saved and rented a room. Now she was her own landlady, and again she had to value every penny, because soon the owner of the apartment would return from the north, which meant that Diana would have to look for a place to live. Moore is only a full member of the family. Sometimes Helen's friend, Diana, feels that the incomplete one is her, and she can eat the day before yesterday's beans and soup or just drink tea with bread and butter more. A meal without his favorite baked pate just won't comprehend. He will look with a look that Helen calls eat yourself, and squeamishly emphasizing pause, will move away from the bag of warm milk or whatever, something that cats are supposed to eat. Will step back and sit down and irritably start licking his shiny black fur to all species, showing, "Not for long. It won't take long for me to stay this pretty with all that vile food." If Helen sleeps just in bed, the Merlot exclusively on the pillow pays for this pleasure, with a voice ringing with a distinct every endless, "Enjoy yourself," the best song for falling asleep. Especially if outside the window blizzard and wind, the glass thickly covered us with snow, and the cat sings and sings in your ear, and the hand sews and stretches from the warmth of the blanket to the living warmth of this cat's body. During an unsuccessful jump on books and newspapers, Curious wandering around the kitchen table chewed the cord from the computer. Your Balsam, whose potty has been turned into a cat box. At first, the Morlot would flee the scene, looking around thievingly. Later, he just squints condescendingly when Helen took him in her arms to pet him again. Well, I'll be patient. But when a stranger appeared in their home, which the cat considered his domain, the baby's wary frozen posture showed Helen that the cat was more anxious than ever in his life. She wanted habitually to pick him up, but the cat, like a small black panther with the untrustworthiness of a wild animal, darted under the sofa and disappeared there for a long time. He appeared late in the evening, without waiting for the guest to leave, and with the same graceful, loving-to-the-floor movements, began to make his way to his bowl. But the cat did not give in and, having gone, again disappeared into the dark corners of the apartment. The guest remained to live in them. Maybe he was not a bad person, but he thought that a cat should be a cat and eat everything out of a bowl. God forbid, to come to the table, to beg and liver is for humans. And the stomach, so what is easier to sleep? At best in the chair and in the wrong place. And a stiff male hand literally sweeps the baby to the floor from hiding. At first resentful, he got wilder and wilder every day. Already he did not come to the kitty got out at the call from somewhere from under the bathtub, and absolutely refused to drink. Even if there was only Helen in the house and you couldn't see him from under the bathtub. Or maybe it just wasn't interesting that Helen didn't differ much from his behavior. She used to lie on her bed in the evenings with a book. Now she sits in the kitchen with the new man in the room watching TV. Helen puts the food in 2 bowls, takes it to the man, puts it on the floor for the cat, and sits on the stool again, looks over the book, and looks into the room. He comes back very late, before he and the cat had their 7th dream at this time. Now the man only turns off the TV at this time. One day there was a noise at home, to such a noise that the Mushalo decided not otherwise. Renovations are starting. It's a scary business. God forbid any cat should have to endure it. He crawled deep under the bathtub, under the wet cold pipe, and waited. And then the house became quiet. Moore couldn't believe the silence and stayed in his hiding place, until familiar knees crouched in front of the tub and a hand reached out to him into the dark depths. That night he slept in his accustomed place on his pillow. Only restless was he when his fur became quite wet and not at all laundered. He shook himself unhappily, got free, and moved to the chair. But his mistress got up and carried him over to her again, and jabbed his face into it. The cat relented and dragged out his eternal meow. For a while, engrossed in his affair, Helen withdrew from Diana. But when, after a grand scandal, she broke up with her boyfriend, she reached out to her friend again. In Helen's horoscope, apparently it was a given from above. If usually her life flowed smoothly, then on the holidays invariably came some kind of nastiness. This time it was the flu. Actually, maybe she wouldn't have gotten sick if she hadn't gone to get a gift for Diana in the store pandemonium, barely managed to squeeze through the crowd, hold out my hand with the money, and quite the acrobatic trick of crawling back out, clutching the change, purse, and box of crystal writing utensils to her chest. The trio must have been gone for an hour when the bus finally pulled up, and the assembled people amicably rushed to take it by storm. Helen realized it was necessary to walk, so she walked straight along the road. She wanted to hiss like a cat that had been pissed off. Damn it, it's March 8th. It's like a litmus test. If a woman buys her own flowers on that day, you put a sign on her. Lonely, which in our country, unlike the enlightened West, is equivalent to unhappy. Therefore, all women's novels in colorful covers about how this is such a no one needs a gray mouse suddenly falls right on his head a beautiful prince. As in real life, there are not in life for one bachelor of 40 years there are 4 unmarried ladies. The spirits in envy bent the brakes, and Helen swerved to the right. The generation fell into the wet snow. As got out on the spot on dry land, took off and shook the snow mush out of her boots, and then poured home this poem. The next day she woke up and immediately realized the fever was high. Cold under the blanket, throat burning, as if our house had been driven on it. Nose swollen in half. The most March 8th kind. Got a crawl to the drugstore. The closest one to her house was the new one. Usually Helen loved it, bang for the Euro trim, and a selection like nowhere else. But right now the white color was cutting her eyes and making it hard to focus. Immersed in her musings, she sneezed all over the pharmacy. The man ahead of her turned around. Helen had no doubt that now he was about to hear a threatening monologue on the subject that there was nothing in such a state to go around the city and infect people. Instead, he said, "Don't take all that stuff. It won't work." "What will?" Helen looked up at him with watching eyes. She was barely on her feet. The man took her under his elbow and led her outside. "Is there any whiskey at home?" he asked. She immediately imagined an alcoholic who had decided to make a profit at her expense. True, he didn't look like an alcoholic, but who knows? Or maybe I have a husband at home. He chuckled. If you have a husband, you don't go to drugstores in such a state. The circumstances became clearer only when they went upstairs to her room, and he first of all began to fill the bathtub with almost boiling water, and then poured a packet of salt into it. I've flown north before. Frost under -50. That's the norm up there. And if someone fell down, we treated him. So put your feet up here and tell me where's the alcohol. Such a potion made Helen drop like a mouse. She lay in bed, tangled in the blankets, and felt the sickness receding. She was terribly sleepy. She woke up when it was getting dark. It was snowing outside the window. Helen didn't realize whether it was morning or evening. And what time of year? She thought it was winter. Large white flakes flickered in the gap between the curtains. Then she smelled a cotton candy odor. It was connected to one once at school. The boys had thrown together and bought all the girls in the class a flower for March 8. It came up next to her hand, still clutching the handkerchief. A mimosa lay there, and the kitchen smelled of freshly roasted coffee. Now in the mornings, as Diana got ready for work, she saw a different person in the mirror. There was nothing left of the intimidated and harassed young woman who belonged in some orphanage for the poor. She still spent her money sparingly on herself, but she looked quite dignified. Diana's usual clothes were jeans and a light breeze. Her hair she shot short, and unknown why it started to slightly curl. Slim, trim, with a good figure and light, tasteful makeup. Diana made a good impression, but it was her eyes that changed the most. The look became detached and rigid. It was clear that such a lady would not be easy to fool, and she would not be able to sit on her neck. Diana sometimes thought aloofly that not so long ago she would have behaved very differently. So the other day she stopped by a convenience store to buy something for dinner and picked out some nuggets that Mike loved. The clerk bagged a dozen and put the pancakes on the scale. Diana reached for the bag. Immediately, the clerk slapped her lightly on the arm. "Don't take it off the scale." "I haven't counted it yet." The old Diana smiled guiltily and spoke. Yes, of course. I'm sorry," the current Diana looked coldly. "I understand the words 'I don't have to be beaten.' Treat your customers better, or will you be kicked out of this place?" Then she turned around and walked out of the store. She bought her groceries elsewhere. She solved the housing issue in her own way. She took out a small loan and bought a room in a former hostel. She liked this Stalinist building very much. The two wings were connected by the 6 coal tower, and there were rooms in the tower, and Diana had one of them. The previous owner loved his dwelling and made it into a mini apartment with a tiny kitchen and a knot. It was Diana and Mike's first place of their own, and they both loved it. So many windows during the day the sun went from one to the other, and Mike, who didn't like the dark, was provided with light until the evening. Diana paid off the loan in 2 years, and then started thinking about selling the room, taking out more loans and buying a 1-bedroom. Or what the hell is not kidding, even a 2-room apartment. But procrastinated. She really liked this house in the center of the city and the top floor of the tower. The only thing higher was the sky. And her hairdressing salon, on the other hand, was in the basement. But everything suited Diana, so it was warm and cozy. The ladies were waiting for their turn. On a soft sofa covered with fox fur, they admired the big, beautiful aquarium, leafed through magazines and drank coffee. But even more often chatted with Diana. Everyone easily found a common language, and the small basement soon turned into a real women's club. Diana had become a real stylist. She almost always found something to advise her clients, prompted them, and when they agreed with her. The result was so stunning that the ladies left in admiration. And when Diana was at home, the phone rang every now and then. Somebody asked for a haircut or a styling appointment. In short, things were picking up. The circle of acquaintances has expanded dramatically, but real under the hand of Diana, at that time there were only 2. Helen, who finally married well, but always found time to drop in once a week for a coffee. Both young women had been through a streak of hardship, and their lives had hardened them. They could be proud of it, but continued to be a support for each other. The second friend was Betty, their son's nanny. Diana's example affected her as well. She began to transform from the formerly shy girl with a learning disability into a relieved person. It turned out that Betty was very much beckoned by traveling, but since she had neither the means nor the ability to travel to distant lands, she pursued local history. She was also going to eventually be hired at the town library, and she was waiting for a place. As for Diana's relatives, things were different here. Her father was slowly recovering and the family was living together. Even Helen had lost some of her bad temper. Diana's younger brother was finishing his studies and was getting married. Diana liked his fiancée, and she was calm for her family. As for her ex-husband, Diana grinned involuntarily, remembering the law of boomerangs. They were officially divorced, and Thomas now had to pay alimony. What was the big nuisance? He tried to argue in court that he was getting the bare minimum of a living wage. Where else was there to support a child? But even the judge awarded it, reminding him that it is unworthy of a man to shift all the responsibilities of supporting his son onto the shoulders of his wife. Then Thomas demanded from Diana that all the alimony, which she will transfer, she will not spend. Put it on the book. Otherwise, I know you. You blow all your money on bullshit. And I want all the money to go to Mike. Diana squinted her eyes. She looked at her ex-husband for a few moments, and then with a few words she outlined to him the route she proposed to take. And for some reason it didn't even occur to Thomas to raise a hand to the young woman, even though he had done it so easily before. Thomas had not yet found a new mate. Women appeared in his life, but none of them stayed for long, notwithstanding his months-long violent nature. When he broke up with another woman, he'd get drunk. And if his drunkenness was particularly cruel, he would go to his parents in the village, where he came to his senses. It was getting harder and harder for him each time. His parents blamed his son for everything that had happened and repeated that he had ruined his life by breaking up with Diana. His parents blamed their son for everything that had happened and repeated that he had ruined his life by breaking up with Diana. For her part, the young woman kept in touch with her elders. She knew that she would never forget the kindness they had shown her at the most difficult moment. Now Diana had no need to hide her address, and every few months, the old people would visit their grandson. They brought with them a purse of village gifts. In return, Diana also tried to do something good for her former father-in-law and mother-in-law. She paid for water to be piped into the house. She promised to help with gas in the future. It was tacitly agreed that when Mike grows up a little, he will spend the summer in the village at his grandparents'. Of course, Diana did not save all 3 months of child support to go to the sea with the child once a year. She still hadn't thought about changing her personal life, until a certain point. Diana didn't have many male clients. Usually all her working hours were distributed among women. Even a dense record was formed. You couldn't get to her just like that. Still, a couple of times a day a man came down to the basement and asked if he could get a haircut. Diana worked fast, and if she had free time, she didn't refuse them. But this attractive young man with inviting brown hair seemed familiar to her. But Diana simply invited him to come in and sit in the chair. She knew she had an abysmal memory for faces. She might not recognize even a close acquaintance if she saw him wearing a new jacket and hat, for example. Conversely, she might greet a stranger with a friendly hello, mistaking him for someone she knew. "How shall we meet?" "The usual way?" Diana asked, picking up the scissors. For your tastes, this answer was not uncommon, and the young woman only nodded. And yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she knew this man. Their gazes met in the large mirror, and he asked how your arm had healed. Nick gasped. "She never thought she'd see you again." "And he admitted, "I've been trying to find you. After all, I held your passport in my hands. I knew your name and address." Diana experienced an extraordinary feeling of bliss. He was looking for her. "But this fellow Nick grinned when I came. I told him you didn't live here anymore. I even went to your house in the village, but they didn't give me an address there either." "I warned everyone," Diana said. "I didn't want my ex-husband to find me. But I couldn't have predicted that you would come looking for me." They smiled at each other and could not contain their joy. On the stairs leading to the basement, they heard the clatter of heels. Where another customer was taking her time. "I realize it's busy, but maybe we can meet tonight." How Diana would have liked to sit with Nick in a cafe somewhere, to talk, to take her time. But Betty had warned her this morning that she couldn't stay late. "I have to let the babysitter go today," Diana said. But both seemed afraid of losing each other again. And Nick looked up hopefully. "But you can walk me home," she said. "Come by 7 p.m., we'll talk on the way." There was also a change in the life of Betty the nanny, whom Diana had hired for her son, and who over the years had become not only an assistant, but also a close friend. The story happened in the summer when Betty, with her backpack and dogs, went to that backwoods area that borders a nature preserve. It was 11 o'clock in the evening. The light of day had almost faded, and only somewhere at the edge of the sky cast, greenish and transparent for the frogs, came the starry hour. In this little swamp in the deep woods, who were they to fear? And they went all out. No, this trip had been an adventure after all. Betty lay on her belly in her small tent, prepared completely for the night by the light of the lantern's stopped books, and tried her best to inspire herself with the feeling. And Estrin, wood that was very even cozy, as if in a small house. But to think that they're separated only by a cloth, a dense reserved forest. And if anything, they wouldn't find her here forever and ever. The most sensible thing to do was to rely on the dogs. The dogs behaved calmly, not dozing at the entrance to the tent. A German shepherd stretched carefree on its side. So he did not smell any danger at all. A bay lay regal motionless, like a lion guarding and the palace, and were a reliable defense. It is, of course, good to see things through to the end, Betty thought. But was it so necessary to come here? Betty was an enthusiastic person, and a vacation was not something one could do with a lot of time. Familiar people were already habitually going abroad, expanding their itineraries every year. You again in Egypt, and we with a breath in Paris, and we in Thailand want to get new impressions. Betty has already realized that you can get new impressions anywhere. For example, during last year's accident, which lasted a week in the apartments, it was like -20 degrees outside, so very fingers at the open oven door. She felt like a resident of a besieged city. Traveling with a tent, even simple weekend getaways were a thrill. Now they were actually more likely to go with her friend Helen and stay on the beach. And everywhere else is close to accommodation. But Helen had caught a bad cold. Betty had been planning the trip for so long that she gave up and decided to go alone. Being a local historian, she knew a lot about her homeland. And a rock with a shell imprint found on the shore reminded her that the ocean had once been here. Abandoned villages, temples from centuries past, now beginning to revive the places were favored by artists, from where magnificent panoramas of the Volga, mountains, caves, about which legends are made. But she was especially attracted to things she had read about, but had not yet seen for herself. That was how she learned about this place in the heart of the local mountains, where everything is shrouded in a kind of mysticism. There was talk of a biological defense. Nature kept its secrets from man. Even harmless birds behaved like predators. The face of the mistress of the mountains was said to have been seen here. Betty sipped hot tea from a mug. But isn't man part of nature? Why should one go to war with the likes of her? All the weapons that a penknife and a small hatchet to chop the apprentice. A sudden movement where the dogs lay made Betty flinch. Worry clearly smelling something in the distance a moment. Later, the fog lifted that had so obviously alarmed them. Betty didn't know what she should do. To hug the dogs, to hold them close to her. It seemed safer that way to her. Or walk out of the tent with them. Try to understand why the dogs seemed increasingly agitated. Theoretically, wolves did breed here, but not many, and they always shunned humans. There hadn't been a single attack in years, especially in the summer when the beast was fed. But probably no fools carried here alone, if anything. Han's a wolfhound by nature. He can handle it. And he's got a lot of strength, too. The hounds were already slithering and hacking briefly. No, sitting and waiting was even scarier. Betty picked up the lantern and lifted it from the shelves of the tent. A tiny speck of light and black, such a hostile forest. And seemingly in the distance a little herd and crunching. Look for it, she waved her hand. The sheepdog tore into the thicket without a second thought, not hesitating in its direction, as if it had been expected. Betty grasped her collar, holding her close to her. Quietly she repeated, trying to hear what was going on out there in the distance behind the barking, finding something. It was definitely not a wolf or another dangerous opponent. The girl knew the nuances of her dog's barking, something from a dog's point of view important, but not threatening. She swore a leash in the form of a con. The most unpleasant thing would be to get ticks or to fall somewhere. Betty tried to illuminate just the ground beneath her feet. But Han dragged her only branches, smacked her in the face with an excited wagging of his tail with a sickle and barking. Barking now in two voices that made her ears pop. Betty raised the flashlight higher and exchanged it for a small semblance of Palanca's. Failing off the floor lay a man. He was conscious, but he was looking at her. Instead, Betty saw that he was badly beaten. The swarthy face, the bruises. his shirt a mess of blood. That pain must have darkened his mind. The dogs realized at once that a man is helpless to fight such a man. But a man is in principle a lord of lords. He must not be allowed to die. That's the way to call for help. That's why they dragged Betty here, eating or now as if asking, "See? See?" Betty was scared out of her mind. An accident. Poacher, criminal altercation. What did she get herself into? They won't rush out. She was quick to say it, as she always said to those who had close encounters with her boys. But this time it was more likely to come out of inertia. The man responded. He gasped and spoke softly. "Please let me if you can, and leave quickly." So he's also tied up. No, nothing good could be expected here. Anything. But it doesn't look like an accident. Betty fumbled in her jeans pocket for a penknife. It was a very small knife, good for cutting bread and sausage, not sawing rope. But if she did manage it, suddenly he'd have her right there. "I won't hurt you." Even more quietly, the man said, "Don't be afraid." Betty unfolded the knife and walked over. She was ashamed of her thoughts, but somehow on the surface. And deep down, fear lived. He shifted heavily from. Opening her back, her hands were tied behind her back and tightened cruelly. The hands were no longer a living color. This is not the way one binds for the purpose of frightening. One binds without caring because soon it will just be a body. "What's wrong?" asked Betty. "Why?" asked Les. "You know?" He took a breath. "I came to a friend's house for a master class with the students. So in front of us lies a man of intelligence. The martial arts of jiu-jitsu. I gave a master class, watched the guys. And then the pause was longer. Speech was confused as well as breathing. We sat in a cafe in the hotel. 2 men attached themselves to us. We didn't want to get involved for a long time. They started. Then we put them down. I don't know who. Maybe you're tough guys. I don't remember the night in the room. Woke up in the car with my hands tied. They brought me back, beat me up, and told me they'd give me 2 hours. Then they'll start the hunt. They said no one would find it here." Everything that could have followed was in Betty's mind in 1 minute. Of course, he couldn't get far in his condition. Hunting with dogs for poison. Witnesses are impossible here. People are inventoried here every 3 years. Her tent is next door. And of course, she won't be left alive. Legs, arms, ribs intact. Quickly asked the girl and burst his arm. "Let's run." All bodily pains were to be put aside for later. "We'll sort it out afterwards. If we stay alive." Home, she told the dogs. She dragged him to the tent, and the dogs raced ahead. He followed her hard, but he made it through the bushes. So should we walk after all? No, she'd probably drag him. There was a force in her that wasn't hers. She was being carried. What time was that? 1 hour and 15 minutes. Betty was holding the lantern in the same hand that the clock was nodding off on. "We still have 40 minutes. Just go." He tried to almost compel her with every syllable. "No, leave me alone. The commissioner won't be here." For what? Both of them campaigning? Cheers. Tent Betty slipped inside, grabbed the nearly empty backpack. What's important now? There'd be time to roll up here, but there isn't. There's only one way through the forest down to the Volga. There's one place to hide. Not much hope, but there's nothing else to do. Will they find the trails right away? No. Only one direction down the mountainside. That old pine needles are like soap. The man may have diverged a little, but now they were running almost side by side. There's a ravine coming up. There's roots from under the ground, grabbed from behind them. Betty recognized the spot where she had climbed this morning. There's the pine tree. Some of the roots sticking out selectively as if from someone's feet. And there's a darkening ravine, 2 meters into it just to jump. The walls are almost responsible, but by catching on the roots you can throw your body over. There was no need for the dogs. They went down and into the forest, and were waiting for them already on the other side. It was much brighter on the bank of the Volga, a clear moonlit night, and the surface of the water mirrored not black, but gray sky from the multitude of stars. Into the water. Betty forced herself not to scream. Who knows where they are now? But her whisper sounded like a shout all across the water to the trail of dogs sure to rush after her. When there was something unusual, they always stayed close. And this wasn't just an unusual menace. It's time to look around. Where the enemy is, who to tear up? What's the bottom here? In this country, there are pools, steep cliffs, and currents, where those who drowned were not found immediately. Sometimes months later, they didn't feel the cold, the water. Betty looked back to the shore. Where is it? There's a rock protruding like the Whitehorn and a birch tree above it. Is there a cave there rather? They'd found it with Helen once. It's not an object, just a hollow in the rock. It was uncomfortable to sleep in. The entrance was blocked with rocks. But it was cool during the day, and they spent a few hours escaping the heat and marked the cave in their memory. Besides, the place was inconspicuous. If you looked from the riverside, a rock-like cliff obscured the entrance. Betty wasn't expecting it, but the man, realizing where they needed to go, climbed up first to pull her by the hand. Time. 3:30. She didn't continue. Clear as it was. The hunt is already underway. Now it is necessary that not a single sound be made, lest the dogs of the hall discover themselves and at the sight of strangers. Silence, silence. Almost with her lips, Betty repeated. The dogs were still lying quietly at her feet. They would probably only reach the river if they lost the trail. Some more time had passed. Now only the rumor of the glint of an occasional wave, the cry of a bird, and somewhere still very far away voices lived. The man quickly fumbled for his backpack and took out an axe from it. With his free hand, he pushed Betty farther into the cave and pressed her to the ground. It won't help, she whispered about the hatchet. I'll stop one of them. How many are 4? He whispered. But if they come up by there, you hear do not call. That is quiet. The distant gleam of water and someone else's speech. Silence. They heard nothing more. What if these ones went the other way? If you break now and more often right at the entrance to the cave, the dogs will intervene. But suddenly those Betty's weapons lay on the rocks, stabbed in the head in his hand. With all my might, I wish I could not be. It was dawning quietly, he said. The sky was already dark blue. It was a reminder of the need to hold out against the evil force until the roosters were gone. Soon the first meteor of the boat would go. It would hardly be safe to hunt people. Khan crawled to come warmly sideways again. This, too, was sitting up. Now here leaning against the rocks. Didn't look like a partisan. Laying down before throwing a grenade. What's your name? Martin. And you, Betty, said Lana more and more clearly. Betty raised her head, finding herself dozing off. It probably hadn't lasted long at all. It was light, but it was still early morning, the water divided by liquid silver and the red glare of the rising sun. The dogs doused her from all sides, warming her and delighting in letting their mistresses lay almost on top of her head. This brief rest only made her realize how sore her muscles were. What a heavy head on the neck. Martin quite seemed to be awake. He was also sitting against the wall, guarding the recently redundant view. It was now, of course. But let me see you, Betty said. He covered her hand. You don't have to. I've done a lot worse. But what you did, just don't get on your knees. Let's get out of here. The shore further on is bad, rocky and narrow. And then it won't be Zina, and there's a forest ranger. I wrote about that forester. He knows me only the road. There's a dirt road. No car. The car there from the national park comes rarely. There are horses. But she thought he smiled in the semi-darkness. I can do that. Then let's go. They made their way along the riverbank, resembling the most careless tourists who had lost their backpacks, who had gotten lost, and whom the local places were catching up with to the fullest extent. At any rate, the forester Anthony was startled when the scratched and shot girl, whom he knew well, appeared before him. Nevertheless, it took a long time to convince him that it was not a drunken delusion and not tales of the Vienna forest. There was no need. There had been riots and drownings, and he tried not to mess with the scumbags from out of town. So I figure you get on horseback to the highway that goes to town. You go home, that's Betty. You catch the trucker. I don't know who the hell's picking on you. I'm not risking a train now. Betty shook his head. Anthony, the only thing I'm afraid of is horses. No way I'm going. What are we going to do with you? Will you radio for someone to come get me later? I'm in no hurry. Her fear came from an incident from time immemorial, when in the park on the 5-year-old Mike horse blew away, threw off, not wanting anything bad. And that sense of power still inspired terror in the girl. Martin took the bridle as something native and not a foot in the stirrup. He was on his horse in one stride. Betty no, she even backed off, but he overreached with me. He held out his hands, palms up. I'm not going. There's the hedgehog, the forester said without rancor. Your shaggy fools are even scarier. They have teeth, and the horse is old. Oh, she's not going to drop the kids. Go on, I'll get out of here. I'm not saying goodbye, Martin said. Betty sat upright on the grass, wrapped her arms around her knees, and listened, quickly moving away all the stomping of hooves. The dry sounds resembled gunshots. She cried quietly. Tomorrow I'll write a letter to my mother. I'm living well until they shoot me. Wouldn't you like a thrill? You say? Con rode around the ground with keen interest. He must have smelled a mouse or a lizard. Betty took a long time to recover from the adventure, but Martin found her. She had traveled to see him, and now the relationship was growing stronger. Martin was already bored and calling to move soon. In the fall, they were to get married. For Mike's birthday, the young women decided to have some sort of a birthday dinner. Betty did the cleaning. Helen also came in advance with large packages. In addition to the gift for the birthday boy, there was something else for the festive table, because on the tiny loaf, actually, the cubbyhole is fenced off by a closet. You can't really sort it out. But of course, the cake was already showing off on the table. One of Diana's clients was a pastry chef and now surpassed herself. Prepare a work of pastry art. A chocolate bear sat on top in a forest clearing, and a little boy kept his admiring eyes on it. He knew it was forbidden to touch the cake, but he couldn't leave the table to contemplate his sweet treasure. Helen was finishing hanging the balloons. Is our mom running late? Yes, Mike, she said, tying the biggest balloon on the string. Mommy's working, said the boy. It's a good thing we don't have a hot meal planned. We have to heat it up. She promised we'd be at the table at 8:30. But she's got her hair salon open till the last customer. Betty was putting sandwiches on a plate. She said worriedly, I'm afraid I should probably cover it with cling film. Some cranky client is making her curls redone 20 times, Helen suggested, or tells the story of her family to the 7th knee. Betty chimed in, but David knows how to put them gently in their place. Maybe she stopped by the store. Want to get something else for Mike? Yeah, probably the last thing I'd think a girl would be late for a date. She told me she'd had enough of so-called love and family life, that she'd never do it again. Everyone has their own happiness. Helen jumped off the couch, adjusted the bedspread. You and I have found good men. Does she have a job? Does Mom work? Mike, notwithstanding, slightly touched the Kremlin and roses with his finger, and immediately put his finger in his mouth. Be patient, sunshine. Now we'll sit down at the table. Betty looked into the boy's eyes. Are you hungry? Shall I feed you? Come on, where's Diana? Len, call her. But Helen didn't have time to dial the right number. There were footsteps coming from up here to the top of the tower. There could only be one person in a hurry. At last, Betty hurried to open the door, swung it open, and stepped back in surprise. Behind Diana's shoulder stood a tall young man. Meet Diana stepped to the side to introduce the guest. This is Nick. The friends ought to themselves. Of course, they were aware of that acquaintance story, but they had no doubt that this would be just one of those episodes that would forever be remembered. How did you find each other? But Diana did not respond to Betty's exclamation. She picked up Mike, who was always shy around strangers, and now he was hiding behind her back. And the hero of the evening, please love and applaud. Nick, unknowingly from nowhere, as if out of thin air, took out a people's red car and handed it to the birthday boy. And in a few minutes, everyone was already sitting at the table, pouring champagne. Mike, who went on Nick's lap, did not take his eyes off the gift. He even forgot about the cake, and outside the window the rain was ending. And it looked like a rainbow was about to burst in the sky and start shimmering with different colors.
Subscribe and click the bell.
If Molly had ever been told, even in a delusional dream, that she would choose such a dress for her wedding. She would have laughed. But now, standing in the fitting room and looking at the ruffles on the dress, she was sure it was just right. "Let's arrange a photo shoot for you," Kathy said excitedly. "Like you're all dirty Cinderella in a floor cloth, sitting in some back alley. This will be the first part of the photo shoot. And then I'll shoot you at the wedding, where you're all of yourself, such a queen, going to the groom in love. That would be the bomb. No one usually looks at wedding photos, and you'll show them to your grandchildren." Molly listened to Kathy and realized that there was no way to get rid of her crazy idea, so it was better to save her nerves and agree. Kathy was a stubborn and persistent girl. Probably, if she were just a friend, everything would be solved easier. Molly would just stop communicating with her. But what to do if this glamorous tank got you as a sister? Actually, they were only half-sisters. Kathy was her father's daughter from his first marriage. Molly treated her evenly, even with some sympathy, but she would hardly be friends with such a person. The girls were too different in character and upbringing. If it weren't for Daddy, Molly thought for the umpteenth time. If only Dad hadn't been so stubborn, I could have kept a cool sibling relationship. But Dad had gotten it into his head that his daughters had to be best friends. "Dad, we're very different from each other, and she's 10 years older than me. What do we have in common? We didn't even watch the same cartoons when we were kids. Molly, I've had this conversation about every few months or so. I don't count on my father's understanding. Kathy likes one thing and I like another. We can't even decide what movie to watch. She likes dresses and I like jeans. She likes Asian food, and I'm allergic to seafood. I mean, no, I'm nice to her, but we just have nothing to be friends about." Dad, as usual, remained adamant. "If you need a reason to be friends, you can consider blood relation a good reason. You're still young, Molly. You don't understand a lot of things." "Dad, are you sure?" The girl snorts. "Why do you think so?" "Because," nonchalantly answered the father, "because I'm older than you and I've seen a lot of things in my life, more than you can imagine. And I know all too well that partners, friends, buddies, all that is good, but how many of them will stay by your side in a difficult moment? It's good if it's one too, but family people won't let you down. One's own friend is one's own friend. And now I had to agree to a stupid photo shoot. Go early in the morning to some creepy second-hand store on the outskirts of town and try on the creepy rag Kathy had picked out. The dress, once white, had lost its color, probably 20 to 30 years ago. Now it looked dirty gray, and in some places there were yellow spots. These were located in the armpit area, and gray-brown, which had a place of honor on the straps and hem. The zipper on the back had obviously been replaced at some point. Otherwise, how else to explain the fact that the zipper was not white or even gray in the tone of the dress color? The zipper was scarlet, and from afar it could appear as a bloody scratch on the bride's back. "Vintage," proudly announced the saleswoman, showing Molly this amazing outfit. "Now such a thing is in trend. That's why we decided not to display it in the general hall. You know, customers are different. They grab it with dirty hands. They can even tear it carelessly, and things are rare and, not cheap." Molly nodded, not giving away her amazement at the sight of this masterpiece. "It's really exclusive," she said seriously. "I've never seen anything like it before." "I'll tell you more and you will not see," joyfully praised the saleswoman. "I know what you're thinking right now. You think I want to sell you a shabby old thing, cheap, for the price of a new thing, don't you? Don't answer that. I know that's what you're thinking. But if you try this thing on and compare it to any other similar item from any other store, you'll see the difference. You don't believe me? then go to the fitting room. Molly, indignant at the saleswoman's insistence, did not object. Of course, this lady has a vested interest. She probably makes no salary, lives on a percentage of sales. There were no customers here, not a single one in half an hour. And who needs second hand? Located in an industrial zone and squeezed between garages, which ingenious owners converted into a flea market. In 2 garages from here they sold potatoes, and in the next garage they sold fruit. The garage opposite the second was decorated with a huge sign, "Shoemaker's Workshop," and to the left of it a man dressed in a tracksuit, judging by his crimson nose and cheeks, drinking heavily, was seated on a low stool. Right in front of him were 2 wooden crates. On one of them were piled a huge pile of brooms for the bath. On the second crate were small bunches of flowers, the height of a woman's palm. The small red-orange flowers, which were abundant in every front garden, suggested that the merchant was probably there to replenish his stock. Walking through this improvised market, mostly pensioners and even women of indeterminate age with a bunch of children. What can I say? To work in such a place, and the enemy would not wish. Should we be surprised at the eagerness of the saleswoman? The fitting room was the far side of the garage, separated from the sales floor by a curtain on a rope. Molly pulled the curtain, leaving her alone with a rectangular mirror leaning against the wall. "If you want, I'll give you shoes," the saleswoman shouted from behind the curtain. "You'll be able to evaluate the whole image. Here, girl, take them." And from behind the curtain a woman's hand holding the shoes appeared from the side. The shoes were large in size, pointed toe, and without backs, but they did have heels, and even too high. "Thank you." Molly decided to be polite by all means, though she wanted to send this annoying person away. The dress was indeed impressive. Besides the color, the stains, the bright red zipper, it had a few other interesting features. First, the neckline, which was supposed to be asymmetrical, was symmetrical without measure. Because of this, any, even balletic posture, automatically began to seem skewed. Secondly, not only the bodice and hem, but also the waist of the dress were decorated with ruffles. The caterpillar effect. Molly laughed. "I always wondered what I would look like if I sat on chips and hamburgers and mayonnaise." Besides, the previous owner of this vintage luxury was clearly shorter than Molly, 10 pounds shorter, the hem of the skirt not reaching her ankles. In this, the girl thought, there's an upside to that too. Even in rainy weather, the hem in a puddle will not get dirty. "What's up? How's it going?" The sales girl called her again, and Molly resolutely pulled the curtain back into the hall. "How do you like me?" she asked and spun on the spot, spreading her arms apart. "Do I look good?" "Does it look good?" the saleswoman exclaimed. "You ask me, girl. It looks great on you. It's unbelievable. You look like a fairy tale princess. What a waist. I can't take my eyes off it. And the lace, the ruffles, so delicate, so delicate. How can you not go for it?" "No way." Molly caught the eye of the broom and flower merchant. The expression on the man's face was more eloquent than any words. He looked at the girl, slightly opened his mouth. In his gaze mixed bewilderment and pity. "It happens." That's what was written on his face in arched letters. For a second he squeezed his eyes shut and shook his head, as if to see if he had seen Molly in that outfit. "I'll take that dress." The girl smiled. "Just find me a bag of some kind." How nice to deal with such customers. The saleswoman blossomed. Now, when the intense desire to impose a purchase, replaced by the joy of the deal, she relaxed and spoke almost sincerely. and Molly suddenly noticed that the saleswoman was definitely not more than 30, and she was even very pretty. "When you came in, I immediately saw that you are a tasteful, understanding girl. I have a good eye. I've been working here for a while." The price to be paid for the purchase was unreasonably high. Molly realized that if you haggle, then surely you can get a significant discount. Who else, for God's sake, would need this work of sartorial art? But she didn't feel like haggling. She was already tired of this store, of this miserable neighborhood, where everything was as dull, as lightless, as gray as the wedding dress for which she had just paid a fabulous amount of money for such a rag. If it were possible to teleport from here, slap, and you are already in another place, preferably in her favorite coffee shop, where the cozy light, the tabletop of pink marble, the exquisite coffee aroma wafting over the cup, made of inconceivably fine porcelain. And then there is the sweet waitress Betty. She always smiles so genuinely at Molly. And Michael is a true wizard, a master of vanilla chocolate magic, always saving a few chocolate hearts with apricot filling. These are your favorites. I've set aside the best ones, and she'll make a caramel cheesecake sauce especially for her. That's where I'm going." The girl instantly decided as she left the store. The seller of flowers and brooms sympathetically smiled at her, and then took one of his polo wilted bouquets in his hands. "Here you go. This is for you. No money. You do not look that they wilted, the goods first grade. When you put them in water at home, they'll come to life." "Thank you," Molly mumbled, accepting the street vendor's gift. "I wish you a good trade." She squeezed between the makeshift stalls, hurrying to get to the corner where she had left the car, but, as luck would have it, it began to rain frequently, and the few market visitors hurried away, trying to hide from the damp, and the vendors rushed to cover the trays with plastic sheeting. Several times Molly ran into the same elderly woman who was walking from one stall to another, talking loudly on the phone. She had her head wrapped in a plastic bag, so she wasn't afraid of getting wet. But Molly, it seemed to her, was deliberately getting in the way and making it difficult to move. "You're everywhere, aren't you?" shouted the woman after another collision with the girl. "Why are you following me? What do you want?" "Sorry, I didn't do it on purpose." Almost crying, Molly replied. No one had ever raised her voice, and the rudeness of the pensioner frightened her. But not 10 pounds away, she could see the corner where the car was waiting, and that gave her strength. "Excuse me." Once again she repeated, rushing forward. "I'm so sorry." Something was shouted at her back, but Molly didn't stop to answer. "Hurry, get out of here." Already in the car, Molly noticed that she was clutching the wet bouquet in her hand. How disgusting! She irritably threw the flowers on the back seat. Nothing in just half an hour she would be in the warmth, among smiles and wonderful aromas, and could forget this nightmarish morning. The coffee shop was still empty at this hour. Usually the place began to fill up after noon, when the socialites, tired from last night's party, woke up and wanted to gossip. There were plenty of guests, but newcomers often appeared. Betty always recognized them by their tired grace, their lack of makeup, and their requests for plaid. The girls, they always looked like girls no matter how old they were moving around in their oversized sweaters, wrapped their palms around huge mugs of hot chocolate, and didn't forget to take selfies with their phones. The amazing thing is, these ladies always had some kind of party the night before, after which they needed to get some sleep. And there was never a morning where they had nothing to discuss. After 3:00 p.m., it was time for stylish, well-groomed business ladies. Even here, while eating delicate desserts, they never let go of their phones and tablets for a second. Business comes first. Michael is the best pastry chef in the coffee shop, Betty confided. Most businesswomen quickly become overweight. And you know why? They eat without distractions, so they pass it on. Here you ate a piece of cake, and you didn't taste it because you were distracted by an urgent call at the time. Is that a shame? Yes, it is. You have to order more. But then there's another call that you can't miss. So if you want to stay slim, don't let yourself be distracted while eating. In the evenings, the crowd here was mixed, and that was the busiest time. And early mornings, that was the time for Molly and a few other early birds. Today, however, Molly was running late. Has our princess shown up yet? Michael peeked out of the kitchen. Betty shook her head. No, I don't think she will. Don't you read the news? Michael grinned. The news? In the tone of an oracle, he said. Reading is bad for you. I'm not ready to soak up negative emotions and poison the food I cook with them. The waitress snorted. He's always like that. You never know if he's joking or serious. The bell on the door rang melodiously, and there was no time to explain. Molly, slightly drenched in rain, appeared on the doorstep of the coffee shop. Good morning. Betty smiled. You must be cold. Shall I bring you a blanket while your order is being prepared? Yes, please do. The girl hurried to her favorite spot. It was not a deep alcove in the wall with a beige-brown sofa covered with cushions. On the shelves stylized under stone ledges smiled with affectionate warmth, lamps, candles. On the sofa loved to lounge on the general favorite, a luxurious Persian cat. A couple of years ago, someone from the staff brought here a blue-eyed Persian kitten, red-brown in color. At that time, this institution was not as successful as it is now, but with the appearance of a fluffy kitty, the situation has changed. Visitors began to be attracted here like a magnet. The little one was named Praline and was allowed to walk around the hall whenever she wanted. She became the mascot of the coffee house, and a funny belief quickly spread among the guests. A good day awaits the one to whom the beautiful Praline will jump on the lap. This time the cat was not in its usual place. She had gone somewhere since last night. Betty explained sadly. She'll probably come back, maybe even pregnant. We hadn't sterilized her. She will. Molly said, Don't look so sad, Betty. Would you like me to take your mind off things for a while? My girlfriends and I decided to have a Cinderella-style photo shoot at our bachelorette party. You won't believe where I went to find the right dress. By the way, it's not very far from here. But Betty, you should have seen it. Can you believe it? There's garages and garages and garages and garages, and each one's been converted into a store. But store is a bit of a mouthful. The people there are wild, not people, but goblins. But I found the dress. In general, if you want a thrill, you don't need to watch horror movies anymore. Just go to those places. You won't regret it. You've never been there? No? Betty shrugged her shoulders and smiled crookedly. Why not? I've lived there since I was a kid. And my daddy has a store in one of those garages, too. He sells vegetables and fruit, and they're always the freshest and tastiest. Molly blinked helplessly. I should have said that. Who was pulling her tongue? I'm sorry, Betty. I didn't mean to. I'm used to other places, and I said it out of surprise. Oh, how could I do that? I'm sorry again. The waitress nodded dryly. Your order will be ready in a minute. Molly shook her head tiredly. What kind of day was this? Such a horrible day. Some grandmother had yelled at her. She'd gotten soaked in the rain, and now Betty had hurt her for nothing. Molly, not unlike many of her friends and even her half-sister, was brought up strictly. Kathy was always yelling at the driver in the cab, calling sales assistants stupid. And the pedicure master could easily get from her a poke with her foot for not evenly trimmed cuticle. That wasn't the case with Molly. She still remembered the fight her father had gotten her into when she, an 11-year-old Moshorka, in a fit of teenage rebellion, had once sassed her nanny. Rules of behavior were not invented by fools. They're there so people can interact without any silly scandals. Molly yawned. She hated lectures, and she found her father's calm demeanor intolerable. Just once he'd lost his temper, screamed, broken something, but Dad never lost his temper. "And I am bored with life, without any silly scandals," daringly she answered, looking her father in the eye. He was not confused, did not tremble. "Then scandalize with your girlfriends. But if a person works for you, it does not give you any right to humiliate him." My father said then. "First of all, because only plebeians behave like that. A man from a decent society would never allow himself to stoop like that. Besides, you mustn't forget that the nanny can quit and get a job with another family the very next day. And we'll have to spend a lot of time before we find a decent replacement. Is your precious Kathy a common plebeian too?" Molly asked in an innocent tone. "I'm not prepared to discuss it. Father cut her off. But neither do I intend to repeat the same parenting mistakes I made with Kathy, and now you'd better apologize to your nanny." To better learn the lesson, the father for 2 weeks deprived Molly cash pocket money and forbade the use of credit cards. Subsequently, the girl was convinced many times that her father's teachings were not wasted. Molly finally made sure of it in his 17 years. When it was time for the first love, the guy she was in love with all through the school year invited her to a cafe. The girl couldn't remember herself from happiness, but all her love unknowingly evaporated when she saw how rude to the waitresses the young man. In the young waitress, the guy threw a plate because he thought there were frozen vegetables in the salad. Molly tasted the salad as well, and the vegetables were fresh. Apparently, the young man decided to impress in this way. The waitress was replaced, the salad was apologized for, but the matter did not end there. Her suitor had a new idea of fun. Now he was mocking the young man who served them juice. As soon as the waiter turned his back for a moment, the jolly boy knocked the glass to the floor. "Why do you always put the glasses on the very edge of the table?" He was indignant. "Don't they teach you anything at all?" Molly left before dinner was over. Dazed admirer ran after her all the way to the exit, and all persuaded to say what she did not like so much, but she would not answer him. To her father's question as to why she had returned so soon, Molly answered briefly, "He is a plebeian," and no further explanation was needed. But now she herself had behaved worse than any plebeian. Shame on her! The girl did not immediately realize that someone was staring at her, and therefore she even flinched when she saw the blue cat eyes watching her intently from under the table. "Sweet Candy, is that you? How you scared me!" Molly leaned over to the cat. "It's so good to have the kitty back. Maybe it's a sign that the rest of the day is going to turn out well. Come here, kitty cat. Here, kitty, 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 kitty." The cat ignored the guest's flirtations, wagged its tail lazily, and turned away. "Oh, come on. What happened? Didn't you recognize me?" Pralin didn't even turn her head in the girl's direction and walked leisurely past her toward the kitchen. For some reason, this arrogant feline indifference was offensive. "Your order." Betty placed a cup of coffee and a plate with an impressive piece of cheesecake on the table. Molly smiled, almost pleadingly, at the waitress. She was still terribly embarrassed about her rudeness, but the main thing was that she really felt good about Betty and didn't want to offend her. She touched the edge of her plate with her finger "Did Michael make the sauce especially for me?" she asked, just to make a point. Betty did not respond to her smile. "The chef's sauce is a separate charge, and it's priced accordingly. You'll probably have to save money now, but you don't have to pay for the coffee." "What?" Molly looked up at the still face Betty. "I don't understand." "I already apologized, didn't I?" The waitress allowed herself to smile with the tips of her lips. "Information gets into the news quickly, and we're goblins, but we're literate." "What information?" "Yeah, what are you talking about?" "Coffee's on the house." "Cold," repeated Betty. "Bon appetit." Praline followed the waitress, giving Molly a contemptuous look. What was Betty saying? What kind of information? What kind of news? Molly pulled out her phone, hoping to make sense of the overly complicated innuendo. News, then. The screen flashed alarmingly with 28 missed calls. Yeah, of course she hadn't heard. She was always forgetting her phone in the car. Good thing she hadn't forgotten it now. The girl opened the full list of missed calls. There was only one number on it. "Dad, I left my phone in the car." "I didn't hear anything." "Did something happen?" "I see." Dad sighed. "You still don't look at the news, Dad?" She was getting nervous. For some reason, everyone is always talking about the news. Isn't it hard to tell a human what happened? Dad didn't answer. "Dad, where are you?" "Can you hear me?" Yes. Dad was speaking very clearly now, almost separating the syllables. "I can hear my daughter." "I'm sorry, Molly, but you're gonna have to go through this life without my support." "Yeah, what are you talking about?" Nervousness turned to panic, and the feeling grew stronger that this was all just a stupid prank. "Why are you always talking in riddles? What happened?" Everything happened. Dad exploded and Molly got it. No, it's not a prank. Her dad, always so poised, so reasonable, yelled into the phone, which had never happened before. "I don't have any more money. Do you realize that? I'm broke, and you're broke with me. Do you get it?" Finally, my father hung up the phone. Molly stared at the dimmed screen of her cell phone for a few seconds, then awkwardly rose from her seat. "The bill," she shouted. As if by magic, Betty appeared beside her. "Here you go." Molly threw a credit card on the table. "Just a minute." Betty smiled politely. "I apologize, but your card is blocked." Molly shook her head. "That's impossible." "Try again." The waitress repeated all the manipulations with the card. "I'm sorry, but your card is blocked." Molly slowly sank down on the couch. "So it's true?" She said to no one in particular. She searched all her pockets. There was some cash in one of them. "Here, take this. It will probably be enough, won't it?" Praline, following Betty everywhere, snorted. "Come here, kitty." Molly called to her pitifully. "Will you at least take pity on me?" But the cat defiantly turned away. "It seems we are no longer loved here," Molly whispered, and she didn't realize whether she was trying to make a joke or had accidentally voiced an unpleasant truth. Molly walked out of the coffee shop and headed for the car. Kathy was already flooding her sister with messages. Her cards, of course, had been blocked too, and she was now in a near hysterical state, sniping Molly's phone. "Come over here soon." She cried into the receiver. "Pay for my shopping. I'm at the checkout line at the mall. I've got tons of stuff, and none of my cards work." Well, who'd doubt it? Her sister's ability to spend all day at the mall was well known. "I'm sorry, Kathy," Molly interrupted her. "I can't help you right now. I have exactly the same story, and you have no conscience." The sister almost roared. "There's a line of people here, all freaking out. And I'm standing here like a beggar." I'm ashamed. So give up shopping." The girl got angry. "I don't have any money." "Okay, bye." There was no doubt Kathy would call back, and then call back 10 or even 20 more times. Just put it on auto dial, hoping to harass the recipient so he'd eventually break down and pick up. But I didn't have time for that right now, and I'm getting married tomorrow. Molly suddenly remembered. The thought of the imminent wedding was crushing, and the girl burst into tears, burying her forehead into the steering wheel. Even this morning, life had been very different. In this life, Molly was the daughter of a more than well-to-do man, and she had everything she could ever want. A young, spoiled girl, fancy clothes, an expensive car, and the latest model phone, lots of girlfriends, traveling and partying. In this life, the future was as plain and simple as the change of seasons. She would marry James because their fathers are best friends and longtime business partners. When one of them had a son and the other a daughter, they decided that their children would marry as soon as they were in their 20s. From an early age, Molly knew she would become James' wife and did not resist it. Dad, smart, sensible as ever, explained to her that it was best for everyone. "Of course," he said, "I know that most people prefer to choose their own spouse. And that's not stupid when it comes to people living ordinary lives. Their children become grown up and independent early. They have to decide who to study for and whether to study at all. They barely out of high school start earning and learning to live on their earnings while trying to help their parents. They gain experiences that neither you nor James have. You grew up like rare flowers in a greenhouse. How are you supposed to know what kind of person you want in a family? You don't even know yourself yet. We've tried to raise you for each other, me and Father James. I can't promise you the euphoria of marriage, but I think you'll live peacefully. Besides, you won't have to worry about money. The wedding will be a good opportunity to merge our companies, and one of your heirs will take over the business in the future. Do you have any objections? What about love?" Out of sheer stubbornness, the girl asked. The father shrugged his shoulders. "Love the lottery. It's not wise to take risks when there's too much at stake. Business reputation, fortune. Finally, the physical, mental health of future children. If you want bad adventures so badly, you can always arrange it carefully. Brutal male with iron muscles can easily turn out to be weak and whiny in everyday life. Wouldn't it be easier to limit yourself to a few encounters with him and then go back to your reliable husband? The only thing you have to do is make sure your spouse doesn't find out. Then he won't let you in on the details of his adventures either. Show respect for each other, and everything will work out fine." Dad was always very rational. Molly nodded, realizing she had nothing to say and didn't want to. She liked James. She wasn't in love with him, of course, but she liked the sympathy even better. It filled her with peace and confidence. And now there was no more confidence or peace in the world. The image of James presented itself to her in her mind, full-figured, dark-haired, with a soft look and a shy smile. She'd never been particularly interested in what he did for a living, where he went, who his friends were. Their relationship was more like that of people living in a marriage of many quiet years. Returning from any shopping, Molly invariably brought a gift, and for the groom, congratulated on all holidays, gave not important, but pleasant little things. From each trip, she brought a souvenir for the groom. He politely thanked her and kissed her on the cheek. Every morning, the girl received a message wishing her a good day, and they always spent Valentine's Day together in some romantic place, and we'd never even had a real kiss. What's kissing? We were never alone with him. I wonder why? Molly suddenly thought. And this discovery turned out to be so wild, abnormal, that the girl could not stand it and laughed out loud. From the street, it must have looked strange. Behind the wheel of an expensive car sat a young girl with tears on her cheeks and laughed heartily. Betty, peering at Molly from the window of the coffee shop, shrugged. The rich have their quirks. She was roaring like a mad beluga, and now she was laughing. Praline meowed affirmatively. Kathy looked angrily at the stairs leading to the second floor. She managed to get out of the mall without too much loss. When her sister had disconnected her phone, making it impossible for her to reach her, Kathy didn't hesitate for a moment. After all, there were plenty of contacts in her phone. "James, hi, honey," she shouted as soon as her call was answered. "James, I've got a favor to ask of you. Help me out, future relative. I have something with my card. I can't pay for my shopping, and I've got a lot of stuff for the wedding. Please help me out. Just don't wire me any money, but come here yourself. I'm at the mall right now." The mall. James listened patiently and wrote down the address. "Okay, Kathy, I'll be there. Don't worry about a thing." He saw her, barely crossing the threshold of the mall. Kathy waved at him with countless packages. "I'm here, here," she shouted. For nothing really. There was no need to attract attention. It was impossible to miss the bright red coat anyway. James smiled, appreciating the extent of the shopping. "You're buying up the whole store, aren't you?" "Along with the warehouse? Not the whole store, just the stuff I liked." The girl said nonchalantly. "What can I do?" "I don't want to look pale at my only sister's wedding." He glanced again at the boxes and bags. "Is that why you bought 8 pairs of shoes and 24 evening gowns? Are you really going to wear them all at the same time?" He was teasing her, but his smile was so kind that it was impossible to take offense. Count, math genius. Kathy laughed. "You just don't understand anything about women. I couldn't decide which outfit I liked best, so I decided to think about it at home in peace. What can I count on you for? Here you go." James sighed and took out a bank card from his wallet. "I really don't know much about women." "You're right about that. But I know one thing for sure, you can't say no to anything." Kathy looked at him carefully and smiled broadly, though a little sadly. "Such happiness, Molly, will come to you," she said with a little regret and added more quietly. "Why? Why not me? You'll be lucky." James replied and cheerfully picked up the numerous purchases. "You'll get a fiancé that will make all your girlfriends jealous. Come on." Kathy didn't move. "What about you?" She touched James' hand lightly. "Are you going to be jealous of the guy who gets me?" James was confused and took a step backward, bumped his back against one of the customers, mumbled a crumpled apology. "Yeah," he said with all his might, trying to keep his tone casual. "I'm a married man, so I'm not supposed to be jealous of other men's husbands, even if they are married to gorgeous women." "It pleases me that you think I am a gorgeous woman," said Kathy, still in the same special quiet voice, which for some reason on the skin ran goosebumps. "Yes, of course I do. Shall we go? You probably have a lot of important things to do." James hurried off. Cosmetology and manicures, and of course, picking out an outfit for tomorrow. "Can you give me a ride?" Kathy asked him. "I won't even be able to pay for a cab until I get my card sorted out. This is so stupid." Kathy lived in a huge studio with panoramic windows. The view was amazing. The river and forest on the other side. How beautiful it must be here in winter. "There's a second floor here, too," said the girl, letting James into the hallway. "There used to be a communal house here, and before that, the house belonged to some aristocrat, long ago under the Tsar. When I grew up, Dad bought 2 apartments for me, one right above the other. So I live in a 2-story palace all by myself. Isn't it boring? James asked. You don't even have a dog. Kathy laughed, kicked off her shoes, and strode across the room with a dancing step. I'm not often home, she said. The dog would probably die of homesickness. I see. James stomped awkwardly in place. Where should I put your bags? I'll go. I don't want to take you away from your business. Kathy waved her hand. Throw them somewhere, anywhere, and they won't get away from me. I'm not letting you go without a cup of tea. Oh no, thanks. No objections. I've got to do something to thank you. And my tea is very special. I bet you've never tasted anything like it. Really? James smiled. Shall we test it? Kathy winked. A small table on wheels, beautifully set, with 2 cups and a vase of candy, Kathy stopped at the window between 2 armchairs. I like to sit here, she said simply. Both in the evening and in the morning, really? I like coffee in the morning. I have an original predilection, don't I? Kathy laughed. Well, try it already, and don't you dare say it doesn't taste good. What is it? James blinked as he took a sip from the cup. The flavor of the drink was strange, not at all like tea. It was more like something between sweet baby fizz and herbal infusion. Kathy genuinely enjoyed the effect. My personal recipe, a tea with white rose petals, orange zest, chocolate shavings, and a pinch of pepper. Pepper? James swallowed hard and took another sip. Yeah, she is beautiful. James thought suddenly, why didn't I notice it before? I'm so embarrassed. She said quietly, Did Molly tell you everything? Did she? No. James shook his head. She didn't. What difference does it make? Yeah, it probably doesn't. You're probably right. Kathy slowly twirled a strand of hair around her finger. There was something mesmerizing about the motion. Would you like some more tea? She offered. I'll get some. James suddenly felt a little dizzy. For some reason, he wanted to get up and leave immediately. But suddenly Kathy's face, her soft, plump lips, were right next to him. How had it happened? She'd just been sitting in the chair. So you know everything and you're going to marry her after all? She whispered, almost touching his face. Now she was sitting on the floor, hugging his knees. You'll be lucky, Kathy. James muttered again. The girl remained silent. You'll be lucky. James gently stroked Kathy's soft golden hair. Her bright blue eyes seemed huge and looked so helpless. Meanwhile, Molly dialed her sister's number for the 3rd time. Where had she gone? Kathy always kept her cell phone handy and never turned it off. Yes, but it was too late to leave. The intercom rang, announcing that all avenues of escape were now cut off. It's Molly. Kathy whispered. Okay, go to the 2nd floor and sit there like a mouse. Quiet as a mouse. Quiet as a mouse, you understand. Molly stood on the doorstep, crumpling a bag with something soft inside. The rustling sound was so loud that Kathy covered her ears with her hands. Stop it, she shouted. Don't rustle. Molly, without waiting for an invitation, went into the kitchen. Well, that's better. At least she stopped rustling. Do you have guests? Asked the girl, noticing the 2nd cup on the table. Kathy smiled conspiratorially at her sister. There were guests, and I didn't have time to put the dishes away, and I haven't made the bed after the guests. Even the sheet didn't overpower. You know how I like to get rid of stress, don't you? What about you? Called James yet? Molly looked at Kathy absently, as if she hadn't immediately remembered who James was, and shook her head slowly. No, I haven't, and he hasn't called me. I don't even know if there's going to be a wedding now. Maybe now, well, after what happened, he'll change his mind about marrying me. Would that make you sad?" Kathy asked. "Imagine your fiancé calling you now and telling you there's no wedding. Would you be upset?" James, who was lurking on the second floor, turned to listen, but for a long time there was complete silence downstairs. Had they fallen asleep? "Are you going to be upset or not?" Kathy asked again. Molly shrugged. "I'll be upset. I guess I'll be upset. I'm so used to the idea of us getting married that I can't imagine anyone else. But that's not what I'm thinking about right now. I'm trying to figure out how to move on. I guess I should get a job, but I don't know what to do. I've never worked before. I don't even know what it's like. And my dad, what's he gonna do? I'm afraid he'll start drinking, like from the shock. Maybe we should tell Mom. Why don't she come and stay here till Daddy gets over all this trouble?" No, wait. You're thinking about the wrong thing." Her sister interrupted her. "If you marry your James tomorrow, you won't have to think about any work. And then you can help your father, and nothing will change for you. And if I don't marry him?" Molly replied sullenly, "Will there be a wedding at all? You know, this is so stupid. Today at 4 o'clock I have to go to the dressmaker to pick up the dress and pay for it, of course, and I have nothing to pay with. And now I don't even know if I need this dress." "What? You have no money at all?" Kathy gasped. "Not even any cash left? That can't be true. No way. I spent the last of my cash on something. I can't remember what." Molly lost her forehead. Her mind was jumbled. "I remember. I paid for the coffee at the coffee shop before my dad called me. So now the only dress I can afford is this one here." She rustled the bag again, which contained a hideous dress from second-hand. James grinned bitterly. It was still a shame that Molly had come to her sister's house instead of his. It would have been normal for her to go to her fiancé first, to seek support from him. Would he have refused her? Isn't that what people do? And himself. Immediately he objected to himself. He knew what had happened and had not even called her. He thought she would call him herself. He didn't want to pry into her soul. But is that the way to put the question when you know that someone close to you is in trouble? I'm an asshole. The conclusion he came to was disappointing. It turned out that he and Molly were not close people. Close people do not behave like that. A long time ago in high school, he had fallen head over heels in love with his neighbor. The girl's parents were not very sociable people, and for 6 months in a new neighborhood, they never met anyone. Their daughter hadn't made any friends either, and it seemed she'd never even talked to anyone. James had no idea how to approach this arrogant little thing, but chance came to the rescue. They had met at a dog-walking area, and the Spitz, which the beautiful neighbor was leading on a thin leash, suddenly broke free and ran away. James rushed after it. The puppy wasn't used to physical exertion, so it took a couple of minutes to catch him. "Hold your pet." The girl nodded, then pulled a small notebook out of her pocket and quickly wrote a few words in it. "Thank you for helping catch Klaus," he read as the girl handed him the notepad. "I'm Mute. My name is Lisa." Soon he and Lisa became firm friends. It turned out that the girl's parents were mute, too, and that was why, not because of arrogance as he had thought at first, they didn't socialize with anyone. Now, right after school, he and Lisa would rush to the park and sit on a bench for long hours, exchanging notes. And then one day it was over. "Tomorrow my parents and I are leaving here forever," she wrote in her notebook. "Tomorrow? Where are you going and why?" "To my grandmother's." Lisa wrote, "Daddy says it's the right thing to do." That was all she could get out of her. Now, after all these years, James remembered his mute girlfriend and regretfully realized that even he knew more about her than he did about his fiancée. And his relationship with Lisa had been much more intimate and trusting than with Molly. Congratulations, you idiot. You realized it on the eve of your own wedding. He walked downstairs to the girls at the very moment Molly, wearing her Cinderella dress, was slowly turning around in front of her sister. "Do you like it?" she asked Kathy. "I don't think I've ever seen anything worse in my life, much less worn. It's the most beautiful dress I've ever seen." James said loud and clear, "And you are beautiful, and always will be." In any dress. Molly turned sharply toward him. "James, when you came in, I didn't hear anything?" "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to scare you. I've been here the whole time, just on the second floor. And you and me." He walked over to Molly and took her hand. "We have a lot to talk about. I just realized that we don't know each other at all. I'm sorry. It's all my fault." "What do you mean?" Kathy smiled wryly. For some reason, her face was completely distorted from that skewed, evil smile, which was more like a grin. Such a beautiful, gentle face, it suddenly turned into an ugly mask. "We're in the middle of a revelation," she sang softly. "That's good. Before the wedding, it is better to know everything about each other. Oh, you two are so good. James, dear, I propose to begin by explaining to our little Molly what you are doing here and why you were hiding from her on the second floor. Will you?" Molly, not understanding, looked at her sister, then at her fiancé. He stood with his eyes downcast. "Aya, is there something I don't know?" she asked. "What is she talking about? What are you doing with her?" James took her by the shoulders and turned her around to face him. "I cheated on you, Molly. At least I think I did. I don't remember the details, though. And no, I never thought about it before. I don't know how it happened. He started hitting on me." I shrieked, Kathy. "No, he didn't," James replied calmly. "Kathy suggested that I try some special tea. It made me dizzy and drowsy and weak." Yeah. Kathy snorted. "Weakness, drowsiness. Listen to him. He will now tell how I seduced him myself, deprived him of his innocence. Poor thing." "Kathy?" Ignoring the comments, James continued. "She was very upset about about what happened to your father. She was sitting here on the floor with her head in my lap. I don't remember the rest of it. I woke up naked with her next to me." Molly slowly, like a wind-up doll, turned to face Kathy. "After all, you are my sister," she said quietly. "How could you? And why would you do that?" "Sister?" She laughed shrilly and turned away to the window. "You've always been a bit naive, Molly," Kathy said without turning around. "No, it's not even naive. You've always been a complete idiot. Look at you and me. What kind of sisters are we? We have nothing in common, not a single trait, and my mother. Have you ever seen her? Ever wonder where she is? Did our father ever think of her?" Kathy turned to Molly and James. Slender, tall, golden-haired, but so alien. "I am not your father's daughter," she said, raising her voice slightly. "I'm his mistress." Molly didn't answer. She just stared at Kathy with widened eyes, tiny beads of sweat beading on her forehead. She could feel it. "Kathy," James began firmly, "calm down and stop talking nonsense. Don't you realize what you're saying?" "Don't know what I'm saying," she said mockingly. "Honey, I haven't even told you half of it yet. How about the fact that I'm not a stranger to your worthy parent either? Are you really my sister?" James smiled. "Or maybe a mother or grandmother, just to be clear?" I'm neither, kid. The blonde didn't hesitate. I've been sleeping with your daddy for a long time. And now let's think, Molly, how come your father, a wealthy, serious man, went bankrupt in one day? Use your brain, dummy. These things never happen in 1 second. Someone has been digging under him for months, maybe even years, gathering and sorting information, finding weaknesses. And that someone needed a spy in the enemy camp. Someone with access to everything, to all the secrets. Someone trusted. Who do you think it could be? Think, Molly. A person who's trusted, who can access anything if he wants to, and no one would suspect him. Are you saying it's you? James laughed. That's bloody nonsense. And you know why? There's no reason for my father to pull a scam like that. It's not much of a scam. Kathy pulled the hem of her silk robe tighter and sat down in the low armchair. It's not fraud, my little friends. It's revenge. Many years ago, a man was walking through the winter woods, knee-deep in deep snow. He was clearly not dressed for walking. A light jacket would have withstood at most a light, illuminating frost, but not -25 with wind. Jeans and city sneakers, too, were not suitable for wading through the thicket. The man was dragging a kind of sled made of interconnected power branches. The branches were covered with a sweater and a t-shirt, and on this improvised mattress lay a man, his face pale with pain. His eyes were closed, but the man was awake. From time to time he opened his eyes, groaned softly, and moaned in pain. Nothing. He was encouraged by the one in front. I can smell smoke already. I can smell it from here. We'll soon reach the village, and there someone will give us a lift to the town. Just be patient, just a little longer. Can you feel your legs? I feel. The other one. I wish I didn't feel anything. It hurts like hell. The right one's still okay, but the left one feels like a train ran over it. Be patient. The first one repeated stubbornly and looked glumly ahead. He didn't smell any smoke, so lied to support the wounded. It was not clear where this forest ended, or whether it would end at all. Maybe they were going in circles. He clenched his teeth tighter and tried to pick up his pace. His blonde hair, visible from beneath his hat, was already crusted with ice. His eyelashes were white with frost. His heart grew more and more stiff, an irrational, almost childlike fear that they would wander through the enchanted forest for the rest of eternity. How does it say in fairy tales? The Leshy, if he wants to amuse himself, will make travelers wander more often, will not let them find the way home. He walked minute by minute, falling asleep on the way from terrible fatigue. Don't sleep, don't sleep. You can't sleep now. You'll fall asleep and won't wake up. In order not to fall asleep, he counted his own steps. 1, 2, bad head. 3, watch your step. The wounded man moved on his spruce sled, and again he gave a long sigh. 4, 5, let's go for a walk. We can't get out, moaned the other one. 6, frost can't eat us. 7, we live to please everyone. We'll both be lost here. Why don't you leave me? Hey, hate. We'll survive without asking anyone. If we both die, who'll raise the children? You, James, don't leave me. Nonsense. We won't die. No forest goes on forever, and they don't go in circles. They haven't made a single turn anywhere. It's all right. The forests here, he remembered from the map, are small, and any one of them could be traversed. There's a village up ahead, exactly 100 miles away. He even imagined a few houses under snowy roofs, smoke billowing so there's people around. People are sitting in the house. Some of them are warming themselves by the stove in felt boots. Some of them are reading a book or maybe knitting socks. And on the windows are curtains in flowers or in peas. It doesn't matter. You can have polka dots. There are patterns on the windows. The frost did it. It's beautiful. What else is there? Oh, pies, of course, baked in the oven. Their crust is ruddy, crispy when you bite into it, and inside the pie it's soft, and the filling is delicious. Potatoes in one pie, potatoes in the other. Let it be egg and onion. And the third one should be sweet. With jam, let there be a third one. Suddenly he stopped and sniffed. No, this time he was not dreaming. The smell of smoke, of warmth, tickled his nostrils pleasantly. So the village was very close. Hold on. He shouted to his comrade, and as fast as he could, he strode forward. After 100 miles, he saw a wide gap between the trees. In front of him in the lowlands, the whole village lay like a palm of his hand. Hey, he shouted at the top of his lungs. People, help! No one answered him, but somewhere in the yard, a small dog yapped a couple of times, and then it went silent. People! The man shouted again. His voice was clearly desperate. But then a heavy door in one of the houses creaked open. Why are you yelling? Do you need help? What is it? How in God's name? Did a truck drive over it? The man in the house they were in had helped to carry the wounded man into the house and set him down on a hard wooden bench. Now he was examining the wounded man's legs, clucking his tongue disapprovingly and muttering something to himself. When he had finished, he shook his head and wrapped the groaning man in a fur blanket. It was an accident, explained the one who was well. It's a blizzard at night. The road is slippery. You can't see anything. We would have stopped to wait it out, but we were in a hurry. His son is waiting at home. My daughter is waiting for me. So we overturned. The car caught fire, but I'm okay. My arms and legs are intact. My rib only hurts, but it's from a bruise. But my partner, you can see for yourself. I can see. I'm not blind. Answered the man. We need to go to town, to the hospital, or he'll die. Help me. We'll carry him to the car together. He came to his senses only in the morning and was surprised to find himself in a white hospital room. His comrade was sitting motionless on the next bed, leaning back on the pillow. Was he dozing? No, not likely. He opened his eyes immediately. Are you all right? William? I'm fine. I'm fine. Are you okay? Should I get the nurse? No, are you okay? I'm fine. You've had surgery, you'll live, and in time you'll learn to walk again. You had 4 fractures. They had to put you back together. But you got it together, right? They did. The patient licked his parched lips. So we had Christmas. Why were you in such a hurry? Oh, I'm thirsty. William, it's after the anesthesia. Wait, I'll be right back. The one called William took glasses and a plastic bottle of water from the nightstand. I'll get you some water. Can you stand up? No? Then let's do it this way. He put one hand under his friend's neck, and with the other he brought the glass to his lips. Drink, Charles, but don't hurry, you'll choke. Charles drank greedily in small gulps, keeping his eyes on William. You are, aren't you? He said, withdrawing his hand from the glass. You saved my life. You could have left me there, and that would have been it. All the debts, all the bills, everything would have stayed there. But you didn't. I don't have any bills to settle with you. William replied sharply, no debts either. Not you, not me. And Nancy? The name hung in the air and seemed to heat him up. Nancy. They both liked her with her snub nose, her freckles, and her tangled black curls. They'd met at a frat party. Then the whole dorm was buzzing, of course. The session was closing. It was there, in the kaleidoscope of ruddy laughing faces, that he first noticed her. Her stubborn black eyes locked into his, never letting go for a second, holding him fast. William stepped closer to her, short, thin as a cane, wearing someone else's leather jacket. "Who are you?" "Nancy." A cigarette between cheekily smiling lips, black curls ringing her eyes. "Oh, you bastard," someone behind him said quietly. "He's got it in for the guy. That's it. Lights out. She's made up her own mind." William said quietly to Charles in the room, "You loved her more than I did." It was fate. A shadow ran across William's face. Whether it was love or just the madness of puberty and all the vagaries of puberty, he didn't get over it. He didn't get over it, but then she caught up with him. "Don't go out with her," someone he knew at the time advised him. "She's got half the city following her around like they're tied up. And her, she only loves herself. Get out of your head before it's too late." He didn't. Things had broken down with his wife before the girl was born, and as soon as the baby was a year old, the couple divorced. Having obtained freedom, the ex-wife went to her homeland. There she was offered a job in her favorite specialty and promised to allocate an apartment. There are not for the child conditions. Sensible, she reasoned. It's cold, and I'll be at work from morning till night. Who'll look after Molly there? Let your daughter stay with you, and I'll keep an eye on her. William didn't mind. Molly stayed with her father. Her mother didn't come often, only a few times, but she corresponded with her daughter regularly. Letters from her came once a week and contained long, colorful descriptions of northern nature and stories about work, about acquaintances. At the end of the letter, Mom always asked her to send her regards to her ex-husband and politely inquired about his health and asked her daughter to take care of Dad. And at Christmas always came cards drawn by Mom's hand. She drew beautifully and could well have been a successful artist. Molly always felt that even though her mom was far away, she was very near. After all, the girl knew everything about her life. William, it seemed, and did not think to resent his ex-wife. On the contrary, often called her, told her a lot about her daughter, and invariably invited her to come and visit and stay for any length of time. Once, when he learned that his ex-wife was hospitalized with pneumonia, he himself went to her, assigning all the cases to assistants and brought with him the best pulmonologist. After she was discharged, he personally negotiated with his superiors a vacation for his ex-wife and paid for her vacation on the ocean coast. Just to be sure, he sent Molly along with her, and in that he was lucky, Charles thought bitterly. Yes, William's marriage didn't work out, but they had separated like people, friends, you might say, and the daughter remained with her father and mother. And James never knew his mother. Nancy, however, still occasionally appeared in Charles's life. There were, I think, only 3 such episodes. She somehow managed to find his phone number, and she always called at night. The first call was from New York. What was Nancy doing there? That remains a mystery. She called to wish Charles a Merry Christmas. There was a festive, cheerful noise in the receiver. She must have been calling from somewhere on the street. The city was rumbling behind her, bursting with people's laughter, deafening with fireworks, and voices speaking every language in the world were heard from everywhere. Nancy did not want to answer any questions, but she laughed merrily and wished her ex-husband health and happiness. "Why did you run away?" Charles shouted into the phone. "Why did you abandon the child? Do you even know what I named him? Do you know what your son's name is? Don't worry. Everything is fine with me." Nancy spoke dryly and immediately disconnected. A few months later, there was a call from Madrid. Not once did Nancy ask about her son, and she still didn't know his name. Cuckoo, cuckoo, still cuckoo. Bitter, Charles concluded. Forget it. You have a son growing up. Be happy for him. His friend advised him, and it was hard not to agree with him. When the children grow up, they'll get married. William smiled, cradling his daughter. Charles nodded again. That's a good idea, he said thoughtfully. Their fathers are friends. They've known each other since childhood, and love is love, but family is different. Strange, he thought so sincerely. But now, lying in a hospital bed, saved by his best friend and reassembled by the doctors, Charles felt a cold, slithering, snake-like envy crawling into his soul. Is this what William is in for, such inhuman luck? What had he done to deserve it? Fate saved him from Nancy, that's fine. You can explain that by the accidents of love. But what about now? They were traveling in the same car, rolled over together. Only Charles is lying there, unable to get up. And William, not even a scratch. He's a lucky bastard. I couldn't bear to think about it. It made me feel ashamed and even blacker than before. So what? Roughly interrupted James, unhurried story Kathy. Molly's father saved my life, and he ruined him for that. Do you hear yourself? Not for that. Kathy sighed, but because William, as it turned out, was luckier in everything. He and his wife were separated humanely, no arguments, no quarrels. He was in a car accident, and he didn't get a bruise or a scratch. He was unharmed, and Charles pulled him out. So he's the one for luck. What's this nonsense? Shocked, Molly whispered. Kathy's crazy stories still didn't fit in her head. They couldn't be true. It's all made up. Nonsense. Just because Daddy was luckier. The blonde shrugged her shoulders. Isn't that enough? I, for one, understand Charles perfectly well. Even if you and I are compared, I look at you, you fool, and I don't understand. Why are you so lucky? You were born into a rich family. You've never been denied anything. Your father was so caring. Even introduced me to you as an unknown older sister. Did not want to traumatize his daughter with the message that her daddy beautiful, a mistress appeared, and you have good suitors. Maybe he's a knave fool. I won't argue with that. But he's a good, decent, loyal man, and his pockets are not windy. Am I worse than you in any way? No, not worse, that's for sure. Maybe even prettier than you. And as for brains, there's nothing to talk about. I'm definitely the smarter of the two of us. Do you know where I lived? Do you know where I'm from? No, you don't. You bought that ugly dress in the second hand today, and my sister works in that second hand as a saleswoman. Her husband sits across the street, selling bath brooms. Two twin boys, they send their children to grandmothers and grandfathers and work hard to earn money. And you've never worked a minute in your life, but you've never known need. Everything was brought to you and others like you on a golden platter. Right? But it's not my fault, Kathy. It's not my fault. Molly screamed. Did I take anything from you or your sister? Are you poor yourself? Not poor, not rich, but as it comes. Kathy grinned. I didn't get all this from the sky. I'm not happy with your dads, and I have to pretend to you, my stepsister. But it's better than selling rags in a garage or brooms. Huh, your father always thought we'd be friends, but there's one thing he didn't count on. I didn't want to be friends with you. But you. She sent James an affectionate smile. You could have married me instead of her. Kathy nodded at Molly. How am I any worse? James was silent for a long time. You disgust me. Finally, he said, Molly, let's go. He squeezed his fiancée's hand tightly and turned toward the door. "Stop!" Kathy shouted. "Stop!" In one leap, as if transformed into a wild cat. She jumped out of her chair and rushed to the door, blocking the exit. "You forgot something, my sweet," she purred, but the purr was menacing. "You did rape me, didn't you? It was so horrible." She lowered her eyes and pretended to wipe away a tear. It looked pretty convincing. "You realize I don't even have to file a police report, right? Just complaining to your dad and your dad's dad would be enough." She looked at Molly. "It's scary to think what the consequences could be." "That's a lie," said James in an icy tone. "Get away from the door." The blonde didn't think to move. "But so be it," she said conciliatingly. "I won't say anything to anyone if you agree to pay me a small amount of money every month, just. That's enough." "You're not making any sense, Kathy." Molly tried to reach for the doorknob, and at the same second, Kathy grabbed the girl's wrist with her sharp fingernails. Let me go, it hurts, Kathy." But the blonde, without loosening her grip, with her free hand, grabbed Molly by the hair. "Not so fast," she hissed. James, squeezing between the girls, covered his fiancée with his own. Molly slumped against the wall, her face pressed into her fiancé's back. Kathy, shrieking louder and louder, cut into her ears. "Help, help! Call the police!" "Calm down," James said, panting slightly. "There's been an attack." Safiya continued to shout. "Call the police." Keeping the blonde at arm's length was proving difficult. Kathy scratched and wriggled, hoping to get her nails on Molly. Something glassy fell to the floor with a clinking sound and rolled across the laminate floor. Molly quickly squatted down and grabbed the find first. The vial was small and could easily be hidden in the palm of her hand. The girl glimpsed the label and showed it to her fiancé. "Clophaline," he read it loudly, and then took the vial in his hand and threw it at Kathy. "You're the one who dropped it." Contemptuously, he threw it. The blonde caught the vial and quickly slipped it into the pocket of her robe. "Come on, Molly," James repeated and swung open the front door. "We should go." It was dark in Charles's apartment. William had asked his friend to turn off all the lights. "The light was making my eyes hurt," he explained. "It must be my nerves." They talked in the dark, illuminated only by the smoldering lights of cigarettes. From time to time, long streaks of light ran across the ceiling. Someone drove by with their headlights on. It was tolerable. You could close your eyes, and then your eyes would rest. But now, oblivious to the pain, he flicked the switch himself. Charles squeezed his eyes shut, but William didn't seem to notice the bright beam of light striking his eyes. His face was pale, frightened. "What are you saying?" he asked, shocked by his comrade's words. "What was that just now?" "Is this a joke?" Charles sighed. "I knew Kathy was looking for someone to leak your data to." He repeated, "You know you've got plenty of competitors. Getting to them isn't that big a deal. And they pay for information, and they pay well. All she had to do was choose the highest bidder." "Why would she do that?" "The boil, William. That I didn't give her enough money, kept her full, bought her an apartment. It was enough for all her desires. Did you give her enough?" "Fine." Charles calmed him down. There was enough for a good life, but the girl wanted stability, guarantees. She did not know how to save. It's not in her nature. Marrying you was out of the question, and the years go by. She was afraid that you will play with her, and as her age comes up, you will find someone younger, fresher, and Kathy in circulation on the sidelines of life. So she wanted to be on the safe side to secure her future. Why? William rubbed his eyes. They were starting to hurt again. She didn't tell me, but she could have asked for what she wanted, couldn't she? A bank account, a house, a business. I wouldn't have spared her that. Charles laughed. Women, who the devil can tell when they don't always understand themselves. But she could sell the information, and she wanted it badly. The rumor had already spread among the competitors, and they were all ears. That's when I entered the arena. Made up a pathetic story about how I've been jealous of you all my life because you've always been undeservedly lucky. And so on and so forth. Lying, I hope? Not exactly. Charles shrugged guiltily. I was jealous of you. I was many years ago, when, remember, you dragged me through the woods almost alive. So I had that sin. I was jealous. Even though I was ashamed that you weren't hurt in the accident, that Molly had a normal mother, not a slutty Nancy. I saw her, William said quietly. Nancy. I didn't want to tell you, but I went to Boston last year, and my parents are buried there. I went to the cemetery to worship the graves, and there was a fresh grave. Nancy. I saw the picture on the monument. I recognized it immediately. Someone from her family was there. I think it was a cousin, a second cousin, maybe a third cousin, I don't remember, cleaning up her grave. I asked him what happened. Like her lover killed her, either out of jealousy or just drunk. She's always had a lot of admirers, lovers, and jealous men. At first, I wanted to call you and tell you, but then I thought, why? Only to reopen wounds. We've been strangers to her for a long time, said Charles calmly. She was a spoiled girl with a rotten streak. Well, may she rest in peace. She never even saw her son or knew his name. God be with her. The main thing is that you still have your capital, so you have nothing to grieve about, and the children's wedding is tomorrow. Do you think they'll live together? They will, I'm sure. William smiled and hugged his friend. Meanwhile, James and Molly were walking down the street, holding hands. You know, Molly, said the boy, I really like your dress, I really do, I really do. It's cool. You can say that too. Molly fixed the ruffle on the skirt and laughed. It's a real rag. It's just for mopping the floor. James only gripped the bride's hand tighter, brought it to his lips, and kissed the wrist marks left by Kathy's claws. You are the most beautiful in any dress. He said so quietly that it was almost impossible to hear the words. But the girl heard and smiled at her fiancé, shyly and gently. Then I like it too. Her smile became mischievous. That's what I'm going to marry you in tomorrow. James laughed, picked Molly up in his arms, and shouting loudly how much he loved her, began to twirl her around and kiss her on the lips. Is this really love? Molly closed her eyes and imagined their wedding. They would live in a big house and have 3, no, better 4 mischievous children with whom they would enjoy playing catch-up. 2 happy grandfathers, Molly's father William and James's father Charles.